I still think about that night more often than I'd like to admit. It was years ago, but some things just stick to you. You try to shake them off, rationalize them, bury them under layers of normal life, but they always find a way to surface. Especially when the world gets quiet and the darkness outside your window reminds you of a different kind of darkness. Back then, I was 27, fresh out of a relationship that had sputtered out in the city, and convinced that what I needed was space. Real space. Not just a bigger apartment, but an actual expanse where the closest thing to a human problem was running out of water or getting a flat tire. So I packed up my old Jeep, said goodbye to concrete, and headed for the quietest corner of the Mojave Desert I could find. I wasn't a total newbie to the desert. My grandpa used to take me out when I was a kid, teach me about the stars, how to read tracks, the surprising ways life found a foothold in the barren landscape. I thought I knew what I was doing. I had a good GPS, a satellite phone, plenty of water, food, extra fuel. I considered myself prepared, but preparation, I've learned, only accounts for the things you can anticipate. My spot was deep in a lesser-known section of the Mojave, miles from any paved road. You had to drive over a washboard track for an hour, then navigate by landmarks I'd mapped out myself. A cluster of saguaros shaped like giant hands, a mesa with a distinctive flat top, and finally a basin surrounded by shifting dunes. It was remote. Too remote, my gut tells me now, but at the time, it felt like freedom. I was working on a personal photography project, capturing the desert's stark beauty at different times of day. I was particularly fascinated by the dunes, their endless, smooth curves, the way the light played off them. I had a small, collapsible solar panel to charge my camera batteries and laptop, and a decent telescope for stargazing. My routine was simple. Wake with the sun, shoot for hours, download photos, cook a basic meal, and then spend the evenings under a sky so thick with stars it felt like you could fall into it. The mistake I made, the first of many, was staying too long. I'd planned for a week, maybe 10 days. But the silence, the sheer scale of the landscape, it drew me in. It was cleansing, a balm for a restless mind. So 10 days turned into 2 weeks, and 2 weeks started creeping toward 3. My supplies were running low, and I knew I needed to head back to civilization soon, but I kept telling myself, just one more sunrise, or one more night shot. I was alone, truly alone, and that isolation, which had initially been my goal, was slowly becoming my vulnerability. It was on the 18th night, I think. The moon was a sliver, just a faint crescent, meaning the desert was plunged into that incredible, suffocating darkness that only truly remote places can offer. I was sitting outside my tent, a thermal mug of lukewarm tea in my hands, just looking up at the Milky Way. The air was cool, crisp, utterly still, not a breath of wind. The dunes around me were perfect, silent sentinels, their soft slopes catching the faintest starlight. That's when I heard it, a whisper not of wind but something else. It wasn't loud, barely audible over the hum of my own heartbeat in the vast quiet. It sounded like sand moving, shifting, but it was too soft, too deliberate to be a natural slump or a breeze. It was like a long, drawn-out sigh right at the base of the nearest dune, maybe 50 yards away. My head snapped up, straining my ears. Nothing, just the profound silence of the desert night. I told myself it was just my imagination, the kind of trick your mind plays when it's been deprived of human company for too long. But even as I tried to dismiss it, a small, cold knot of dread began to tighten in my stomach. The silence, moments before so comforting, now felt heavy, expectant, like something was holding its breath. I froze, the mug, still warm, felt like ice in my grip. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between my throat and my lungs. Every nerve ending in my body, which moments before had been lulled by the immense peace, now screamed in alarm. The silence wasn't expectant anymore, it was predatory. I strained my ears, tilting my head, trying to pinpoint the origin of the sound. Was it the wind, finally stirring after hours of absolute calm? But no, the air was still dead. Not a leaf, not a grain of sand shifted on its own accord. And the sound itself, it wasn't a gust. It was too focused, too there. My eyes, already accustomed to the deep dark, swept across the nearest dune. Its smooth, unbroken curve was outlined against the faint starlight, utterly pristine. Nothing moved, nothing was visible. It was just sand stretching up to meet the endless sky. Imagination, I whispered, the sound swallowed immediately by the vastness. My voice was a brittle thing, thin and reedy. It did nothing to reassure me. If anything, saying it out loud made the possibility of it being not imagination even more terrifying. I told myself it was the desert playing tricks, the immense quiet, the sensory deprivation, the slow creep of isolation. My mind was probably just starting to unravel at the edges. It happens. People go a little stir-crazy out here. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to push down the cold tendrils of dread that were now wrapping around my chest. I stared hard at the base of the dune, focusing, waiting. My heartbeat hammered in my ears, making it hard to hear anything else. And then it happened again. This time it was closer, much closer, maybe 30 yards away, a distinct shhh thump, like something heavy had settled into soft sand, followed by that same drawn-out, almost wet, whispery sigh. It was undeniably the sound of mass moving, displacing sand, and it wasn't just a slump. There was an intentionality to it, a deliberate shift. My muscles locked up. My hands started to tremble, and the thermal mug clattered against the ground as it slipped from my grasp, spilling lukewarm tea onto the packed earth. The sharp sound of it hitting felt like a gunshot in the profound quiet. My eyes darted left, right, back to the dune. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the back of my neck. This wasn't imagination. This was real. Something was out there. Something was moving. I snatched up my heavy-duty maglite, which I always kept by my side, and clicked it on. The powerful beam sliced through the darkness, cutting a brilliant tunnel into the black. I swept it across the dune, holding my breath. Nothing. Just the perfectly sculpted curve of sand, pristine and unbroken. No tracks, no disturbance, no dark shape lurking in the shadows. The light reflected off the tiny quartz crystals in the sand, making it sparkle like a million scattered diamonds. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly empty. My breath hitched again. What was I expecting to see? A coyote, a badger, a person? Even as I thought it, the absurdity struck me. A person, miles from anywhere in the middle of the night, and making sounds like that. Still, the thought of it being a person was almost a relief compared to the alternative, which my mind, in its terror, refused to fully articulate. A person, however improbable, at least followed some rules of the known world. The sounds I was hearing, they didn't. My finger hovered over the satellite phone on my belt. Should I call? Who would I call? Hi, I'm miles from civilization, and I think I hear sand whispering at me. They'd think I'd gone mad from the sun, or worse, that I was having some kind of desert hallucination. No, I needed to see something. I needed proof. I slowly stood up, my joints creaking in protest against the sudden tension. My tent was just behind me, a low, tan dome. My Jeep was parked maybe 20 yards away, a dark silhouette against the faintly glowing horizon. For the first time, the distances felt immense. The space between me and my perceived safety felt like miles. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I shone the beam again, slower this time, closer to the ground, searching for any telltale sign. A track, a disturbed patch of sand, anything. But the dune face was smooth, as if untouched. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely more than a croak. It was a stupid thing to do, I knew, but the silence was suffocating. I needed to break it, to assert my presence, however small. The word vanished into the vastness, leaving no echo. The only response was the drumming of my own blood in my ears. I waited, flashlight fixed on the dune, until my arms started to ache. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Nothing, no more sounds, no movement, just the silent, indifferent desert and the impossible tapestry of stars above. Maybe it was just imagination, a late-night phantom born of too much isolation and the vast, empty landscape. I tried to convince myself, I really did, but the cold knot in my stomach refused to loosen. Reluctantly, I lowered the flashlight. The darkness rushed back in, thick and heavy. The stars seemed to gleam with a new, unsettling intensity. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a single, flickering flame in an endless, dark void. I backed away slowly, my eyes still fixed on the dune. Step by agonizing step, I retreated towards the perceived safety of my tent. Every rustle of my clothes, every crunch of sand under my boots sounded deafening. I felt like prey, moving in slow motion, waiting for a predator to pounce. Reaching the tent, I fumbled for the zipper, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. I practically fell inside, pulling the zipper shut with a violent tug. The thin nylon walls offered little in the way of security, but they provided a psychological barrier, a flimsy membrane between me and the unknown. Inside, the darkness was complete. My small battery-powered lantern sat on the ground, still off. I didn't dare turn it on, afraid that any light might draw attention. I just sat there, cross-legged on my sleeping pad, flashlight still clutched in my hand, staring at the unseen fabric of the tent wall. My mind raced, replaying the sounds. SHHH thump, sigh. It wasn't a natural sound, not an animal, not a rock fall. It was too deliberate, too close. I spent the next hour like that, listening. Every tiny creak of the tent fabric, every imaginary rustle outside made me jump. My breath came in shallow gasps. My mouth was dry. I strained my ears until they ached. The profound silence had returned, but it wasn't the comforting silence of before. It was a watchful silence, a silent waiting. Eventually, exhaustion, a potent cocktail of fear and adrenaline, began to set in. My eyelids grew heavy. My body screamed for rest, even as my mind fought it. I knew I wouldn't sleep, not really, not with whatever was out there. I decided to try and make contact. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the satellite phone. Its small, rugged form felt heavy and cold in my trembling hand. I flicked it on. The tiny screen glowed to life, searching for network. I held it up, hoping for a signal, any signal. I had a clear line of sight to the sky. It usually connected quickly, but tonight it just kept searching. No service. A cold wave of dread washed over me, colder than before. This wasn't right. The satellite phone always worked. It was my lifeline, the only thing that truly connected me to the world beyond this desolate expanse. I tried again and again, same result, no service. It was impossible. The clear, open desert sky was perfect for satellite reception, unless something was blocking it or interfering with it. The thought was chilling. I slumped back against my backpack, defeated. Now I was truly alone. No way to call for help, no way to tell anyone what was happening. I pulled out my hunting knife from its sheath and laid it on the sleeping pad beside me. A foolish gesture, I knew. What could a knife do against an unseen entity that could move sand without a trace? But it was a small comfort, a primal instinct to arm myself. The night dragged on, an eternity of waiting. My eyes scanned the interior of the tent, my mind painting impossible shapes onto the fabric walls. My imagination, now fully unleashed by fear, conjured all manner of horrors just outside. Just as I felt I might finally drift into an uneasy doze, a new sound cut through the silence. This time it wasn't a whisper of sand. This time it was a faint, high-pitched whirring, a soft, almost mechanical hum. It seemed to come from above, directly above my tent. My head snapped up. I held my breath, listening intently. The whirring was subtle, barely audible, like a distant swarm of bees, but with a metallic edge to it. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It wasn't the sound of the wind. It was artificial. My heart hammered against my ribs again, this time with a new kind of terror. This wasn't some desert creature. This was something else entirely. I lay perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the ceiling of my tent, trying to pierce the dark. The whirring continued, a low, steady thrum directly overhead. It felt like something was hovering just out of sight, directly above me. A sudden, intense pressure built in my head. It wasn't a physical pain, more like a dull, throbbing ache that seemed to resonate deep inside my skull. My ears popped. A strange, metallic taste filled my mouth. Then the whirring stopped as abruptly as it began. The silence that followed was even more oppressive. The desert seemed to hold its breath. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I waited for what I didn't know, for the whirring to return, for a shadow to fall across my tent, for something to land. Minutes passed, nothing, just the profound, heavy silence. The pressure in my head slowly subsided, leaving behind a dull ache. I tried to rationalize it. A drone, someone flying a drone out here, but why? And why so silently, so low? And why would it cause that strange pressure in my head? No, this wasn't rational. Nothing about this night was rational. I lay there, curled into a tight ball, the knife clutched in my hand, until the first faint hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky with pale grays and purples. It was the longest night of my life. With the first streaks of light, a fragile sense of relief washed over me. The darkness, which had felt like an active, malicious entity, slowly began to retreat. As the colors deepened, revealing the familiar contours of the dunes, some of my courage began to trickle back. I waited until the sun had fully cleared the horizon, bathing the landscape in its golden light, before I dared to unzip the tent. The desert, bathed in the warmth of morning, looked utterly peaceful, serene, as if the terrors of the night had been nothing more than a fever dream. I emerged, blinking in the harsh light, my body stiff and aching. The air was cool and still. The dunes around me were perfect, unbroken. There was no sign of anything having moved or landed or whirred above me. My eyes immediately scanned the sand around my tent. I looked for footprints, drag marks, any disturbance. Nothing. The sand was smooth, pristine. It was as if the night's events had never happened. But I knew they had. The memory of the sounds, the pressure in my head, the abject terror, it was all too real. I went straight to my Jeep. The satellite phone was still showing no service. I tried again, walking a few yards away, holding it high. Still nothing. The connection was completely dead. A cold dread crept back into my heart. This wasn't just a bad reception area. This was an active disruption. I decided then and there I was leaving. Immediately. No more one more sunrise. I needed to get out. Whatever was here, whatever had been making those sounds, it wasn't friendly. And it clearly didn't want me to communicate with the outside world. I started packing with a frantic energy I didn't know I possessed. Everything was thrown haphazardly into the Jeep. The photography equipment, the solar panel, the telescope, all of it was just tossed in. My meticulous organization was gone, replaced by a desperate need to flee. As I worked, I kept glancing nervously at the dunes, at the wide, open sky. I felt exposed, vulnerable. The sun, which usually brought comfort, now felt like a spotlight on my isolation. It took me less than an hour to pack everything. My heart hammered with anticipation and fear. I double-checked the fuel, the water. I had enough to get back to the nearest paved road, then to a small town with a gas station. I climbed into the Jeep, my hands still trembling as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a comforting, familiar sound. I shifted into drive, my foot hovering over the accelerator. Before I pulled away, I took one last, sweeping look around. The vast, empty basin, the towering dunes, the distant mesa, all looked exactly as they had when I arrived. Pristine, ancient, indifferent. But then my gaze snagged on something. At the very top of the nearest dune, the one where I had heard the first whisper of sand, there was a faint shimmer. A distortion in the air, like heat haze, even though it was still early morning and relatively cool. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. It looked like the air itself was rippling, like looking through faulty glass. And within that shimmer, barely visible, I thought I saw a shape. It wasn't solid, not clearly defined, more like an outline, a wavering suggestion of something very tall, very thin, and impossibly angular. It seemed to be observing me. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was there, then gone, then almost there again, a trick of light and perspective. But I felt its presence, a profound and ancient awareness. My foot slammed on the accelerator. Gravel spit from under the tires as the Jeep lurched forward, kicking up a cloud of dust. I didn't look back, I just drove. The washboard track felt endless. Every bump, every shudder of the vehicle jarred my frayed nerves. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my hands ached. My eyes darted between the rearview mirror and the road ahead, half expecting to see that shimmering shape or something worse materializing behind me. The drive, which usually took over an hour, felt like days. The familiar landmarks, the saguaros, the flat-topped mesa, seemed to mock me with their immobility. They were the same, but I was irrevocably changed. I was almost to the paved road, the relief almost overwhelming, when something truly inexplicable happened. The sun was high now, beating down with a fierce intensity. The air in the desert shimmered with heat. I was going about 40 miles an hour, my old Jeep rattling and groaning. Suddenly the engine coughed, sputtered, then died. The silence that followed was abrupt, deafening. The only sound was the crunch of my tires on the gravel as the vehicle coasted to a halt, then the pinging of the cooling engine. I tried the ignition, nothing, just a weak click. The battery was dead, completely, utterly dead. My mind reeled. It had been fully charged when I started. I always checked it. There was no way it could have died so quickly. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me. This wasn't just a breakdown. This was too convenient, too targeted. I got out of the Jeep, my legs feeling like jelly. The desert stretched out around me, vast and indifferent. The paved road, my lifeline, was still a good 5 miles ahead, shimmering in the distance. I was stranded, and some unseen force, had deliberately stranded me. I tried the satellite phone again. Nothing, still no service. It was a cruel joke. I looked back towards the direction I had come from. The dunes were long out of sight, lost beyond the rolling hills and sparse brush. But I felt it, that gaze, that profound, ancient awareness. I was trapped. My heart pounded with a desperate urgency. I couldn't stay here. I had to move. I had to get to that paved road. I grabbed my water bottles, my backpack, and the still-dead satellite phone. I glanced at the knife, still on the passenger seat, then snatched it up, tucking it into my belt. It was a useless gesture, but it made me feel marginally less helpless. Then I started walking. The sun beat down relentlessly. The ground was loose gravel and coarse sand, making every step an effort. My boots sank slightly with each stride, and the heat radiating off the ground was intense. Panic was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe. Every distant rock formation seemed to take on a menacing aspect. I kept looking over my shoulder, my mind conjuring shapes and figures out of the heat haze. I walked for what felt like hours. My throat was dry, even with the water, which was quickly warming to an unpleasant temperature. Sweat plastered my hair to my forehead and ran in rivulets down my back. My muscles screamed in protest. The paved road seemed to recede with every step, an elusive mirage in the shimmering heat. Then I heard it again. The whisper of sand, not just a shift this time, but a distinct slithering sound, like something enormous dragging itself across the ground. It was behind me, and it was closer than I wanted to believe. I didn't dare look back immediately. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, my breath caught in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, then opened them, forcing myself to push harder, to run. My legs were already burning, but the primal urge to flee surged through me, giving me a temporary burst of energy. I stumbled, nearly fell, but caught myself, pushing forward through the loose terrain. The sound grew louder, a distinct shhh thump, growing closer, faster. It wasn't running on 2 feet, it was something else. something heavy and vast, moving with an impossible speed through the sand. I risked a glance over my shoulder. My blood ran cold. There, maybe 100 yards behind me, was a massive disturbance in the sand. Not a shape, not a form, but a colossal, undulating ripple. It was as if a gigantic, invisible creature was burrowing just beneath the surface, pushing the ground up in a huge, moving wave. The sand boiled and churned around it, cascading downwards as the wave advanced. It was coming for me, and it was moving incredibly fast. I screamed, a raw, primal sound ripped from my throat. My legs pumped, ignoring the pain, fueled only by terror. I threw everything I had into running, scrambling over rocks, ignoring the sharp desert thorns that tore at my clothes and skin. The paved road was still so far away. The wave of disturbed sand was gaining on me. I could hear the grinding, sifting sound of millions of grains of sand being displaced, a terrifying chorus that filled the air. It was a sound that made my teeth ache. I looked ahead, desperate. There was a cluster of boulders, a small outcropping of jagged rock, maybe 50 yards ahead. It wasn't much, but it was better than the open ground. Maybe I could climb it. Maybe I could hide. I pushed myself harder, gasping for breath, the air thick and hot in my lungs. My vision blurred at the edges. My legs felt like lead. The ground behind me vibrated. The sound was deafening now, a roar of displaced earth. I could feel the tremor through the soles of my boots. I stumbled, falling to my knees, scraping my palms raw on the sharp gravel. Panic threatened to overwhelm me completely. This was it. I was going to be swallowed by whatever this thing was. But a desperate will to survive surged through me. I scrambled back to my feet, ignoring the pain, and lunged for the rocks. I threw myself at the lowest boulder, clawing my way up, my fingers finding purchase on the rough surface. I scrambled higher, my backpack snagging, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I reached a small, relatively flat ledge, maybe 10 feet up. I collapsed there, panting, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. From my precarious perch, I looked down. The wave of churning sand had stopped directly at the base of the boulders. It had formed a massive, circular mound, perhaps 20 feet across, directly beneath my feet. The sand was still settling, hissing, and whispering. And then, very slowly, the sand in the center of the mound began to rise. It wasn't a natural rise, it was a controlled, deliberate movement. A column of sand, perfectly cylindrical, began to extend upwards from the center of the mound. It rose higher and higher, solidifying as it did so, until it formed a tower of compacted sand, easily 15 feet tall. It was impossibly smooth, impossibly uniform, and at the very top where the column met the sky, the air shimmered again, that same distortion like heat haze. And within that distortion, a shape began to coalesce. It was thin, impossibly thin, and extremely tall. It seemed to be made of shadows and reflected light, constantly shifting, never quite solid. It had multiple limbs, 6 or 8, I couldn't be sure, extending from a central, elongated body. They weren't like arms or legs, they were more like elegant, razor-sharp blades, ending in points that reflected the sunlight in dazzling flashes. It didn't have a head in any conventional sense. Instead, at the very top of its impossibly slender form was a cluster of small, dark, multifaceted eyes, glinting like obsidian shards. They didn't seem to be fixed in place, but rotated slowly, observing, taking everything in. One of these dark, multifaceted eyes seemed to fix on me. I felt a cold, penetrating gaze not just on my body, but on my very being. It felt like it was looking through me into the deepest parts of my mind. A wave of nausea hit me, so intense it made my head spin. My vision swam. The pressure in my skull returned, fiercer this time, a searing pain that felt like someone was trying to pry open my brain. And then a voice, not a sound I heard with my ears, but a thought that echoed directly in my mind. It was cold, ancient, and utterly alien. "You have trespassed." The words weren't in English or any language I knew, yet I understood them perfectly. They resonated with a deep, chilling finality. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was constricted, my body frozen by a terror far beyond anything I had ever known. This wasn't an animal, this wasn't a person. This was something completely, terrifyingly other. The entity shifted slightly, its blade-like limbs glinting. The column of sand beneath it began to slowly, deliberately retract. It was sinking back into the earth, taking the shimmering, impossible creature with it. The pressure in my head intensified, almost unbearable. My vision flickered. I felt a profound sense of despair, of hopelessness. As it sank, its multifaceted eyes, or what I perceived as eyes, remained fixed on me, and the thought echoed again, this time with an undeniable threat. "This place is not for you. Leave, and do not return." Then, with a final, silent slither, the entity vanished completely. The column of sand retracted, the mound flattened, and the desert floor returned to its pristine, undisturbed state, as if it had never been there, as if I had imagined the whole thing. The pressure in my head slowly subsided, leaving me with a throbbing headache and a lingering sense of violation. I lay on the rock, gasping, my body trembling, tears streaming down my face. My mind struggled to process what I had just seen, what I had just heard. It was impossible. It defied everything I knew about the world. But it was real, horrifyingly real. I couldn't stay, I couldn't go back. My Jeep was dead, miles behind me. The paved road was still agonizingly far. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, my mind a chaotic mess of fear and disbelief. I had to keep moving. I had to get away. I started walking again, faster this time, driven by a desperate, primal urge to escape. My eyes were fixed on the shimmering ribbon of asphalt in the distance, my only goal. The sun beat down, indifferent. The desert was vast, silent, and now undeniably hostile. Every rustle of wind, every shifting shadow sent a jolt of fear through me. I didn't look back. I just walked, one foot in front of the other, pushing through the pain, through the terror, through the impossible reality of what I had encountered. The paved road finally came into view, solid and reassuring. It was a lifeline, a tangible connection to the world I understood. I half ran the last few hundred yards, stumbling onto the asphalt with a cry of relief. But even as I stood there on the firm, black top, safe from the shifting sands, I knew I would never truly be safe again. The desert had shown me something ancient, something alien, something that had embedded itself deep into my mind. I walked down the side of the highway, my thumb out, my gaze still sweeping the horizon, half expecting that shimmering form to reappear, to rise from the indifferent sand. The sun was dipping lower now, casting long, unsettling shadows. After what felt like an eternity, a beat-up pickup truck pulled over. The driver, an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes, offered me a ride. I mumbled something about a breakdown, about getting lost, my voice hoarse and trembling. He just nodded, probably used to seeing people stranded out here. As he drove me towards the nearest town, towards civilization, I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror. The vast expanse of the desert slowly receded behind us, swallowing its secrets. But I knew its secrets now, and they would forever be a part of me. The small town was a blur of neon lights and unfamiliar faces. I found a cheap motel, stumbled into the room, and collapsed onto the bed. I didn't sleep. The images, the sounds, the silent voice in my head, they replayed endlessly. The next morning, I bought a bus ticket and left the desert behind. I never went back. I sold my photography equipment, including the camera with all the undownloaded photos. I couldn't look at them. I couldn't look at anything that reminded me of that place. I tried to forget. I moved back to the city, got a new job, met new people. I buried the memories deep under layers of routine and distraction. But some things just stick to you. And sometimes when the world gets quiet and the darkness outside my window reminds me of a different kind of darkness, I still feel that cold, ancient gaze. I still hear that voice. You have trespassed. And I know with a chilling certainty that the desert still remembers, and it is still waiting. Years passed. The vividness of that night's terror had dulled, softened by time and the relentless march of everyday life. I got good at pretending it never happened. I learned to smile, to laugh, to engage in polite conversation without a flicker of the profound unease that still simmered beneath the surface. I even started to believe on some days that it had all been a hallucination, a stress-induced psychosis brought on by isolation and the desert's vastness. Then the dreams started. They weren't nightmares in the traditional sense, at least not at first. They were more like echoes, fragments of memory twisted and replayed. I'd find myself back in the tent, the hum of the night broken by the whisper of sand. I'd see the shimmer on the dune, feel the pressure in my head, but the images were always just out of reach, like trying to recall a dream immediately after waking. They were unsettling, yes, but manageable. Just my subconscious dredging up old trauma, I told myself. But then they grew clearer, more precise. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the memory of that impossible entity rising from the sand as vivid as if it were happening right beside my bed. The multifaceted eyes, the blade-like limbs, the silent, ancient voice, they became clearer, sharper, more defined with each passing night. I started to dread going to sleep. The insomnia became chronic. I'd spend hours staring at the ceiling, trying to fight off the impending visions. The darkness in my apartment, once a comfort, now felt like a prelude to that other, deeper darkness. I also started noticing subtle changes in my surroundings, things that in retrospect were perhaps always there but I had dismissed. The way my cat, an otherwise fearless tabby, would sometimes suddenly freeze, staring intently at an empty corner of the room, her fur bristling, before bolting away as if something unseen had just passed. The inexplicable drafts that would sweep through my apartment even with the windows and doors closed. The faint metallic taste that would sometimes return to my mouth, particularly when I was stressed or tired. I tried therapy. The therapist, a kind, older woman, listened patiently as I recounted a heavily sanitized version of my desert experience. A traumatic camping trip, a hallucination, probably heat stroke. She nodded, prescribed some mild anti-anxiety medication, and suggested mindfulness exercises. It helped a little, but it couldn't touch the core of what I felt. How could I explain to her that I'd been warned by an alien entity made of sand and light? She'd have me committed. So I kept it to myself, buried even deeper, but the dreams persisted, gaining intensity. Then came the messages. They started subtly. I'd be scrolling through a news feed or reading an article online, and a word or a phrase would jump out at me. A perfectly mundane sentence would suddenly feel loaded with a secondary meaning, a hidden message. It was always related to sand or silence or vast, empty spaces. The desert holds its secrets well. A profound silence fell upon the land. The shifting sands reveal ancient truths. At first, I dismissed them as paranoia, my brain connecting dots that weren't there. But they became more frequent, more specific. They started appearing in places they shouldn't. I'd be in a grocery store and a flyer for a travel agency would prominently feature a picture of a dune with the tagline, "Escape to the vastness." A song on the radio would mention whispers in the wind, and I'd feel a jolt. Then they started appearing in my things. I found a small pile of sand, impossibly fine and white, on my bathroom sink one morning. I lived on the third floor of an apartment building. My windows had been closed. There was no way it could have gotten there naturally. I stared at it, my heart hammering. I scooped it up, wrapped it in a tissue, and threw it away with trembling hands. A few days later, I found another small pile, this time on my desk beside my laptop. It was the same impossibly fine white sand. It felt deliberate, a calling card, a reminder. My sleep became non-existent. The fear was a constant companion, a dull ache behind my eyes. I felt like I was being watched constantly. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every sound outside my window took on a menacing quality. I started to withdraw. I canceled plans, avoided friends, barricaded myself in my apartment. I kept the lights on 24/7, bought heavy curtains to block out the night, and even started sleeping with a small, battery-powered lantern clutched to my chest, its faint glow a meager defense against the encroaching darkness. The metallic taste in my mouth was almost constant now. The pressure in my head would return sporadically, a dull throb that would suddenly sharpen into a piercing ache, usually when I found one of the sand piles or experienced a particularly vivid dream. I felt like I was losing my mind. The line between reality and hallucination was blurring. I questioned everything. Was I truly seeing these things, or was my mind finally fracturing under the strain? One evening, I was sitting alone in my apartment, the lights blazing, the curtains drawn. I was trying to read, but the words blurred into meaningless shapes. The sand piles had become a weekly occurrence, appearing in new, impossible places, inside a closed book on my pillow, even tucked into the corner of my medicine cabinet. I felt a profound, chilling sense of dread settle over me. It was heavier than usual, almost palpable. I had the distinct impression that I was not alone. I slowly lifted my head, my eyes sweeping the room. Nothing, just the familiar furniture, the overflowing bookshelves, the dim glow of the bedside lamp. I slowly lifted my head, my eyes sweeping the room. Nothing, just the familiar furniture, the overflowing bookshelves, the dim glow of the bedside lamp. My cat Mittens was curled up in her usual spot on the armchair, seemingly oblivious, but then I noticed it. Her ears were flattened, and her tail, usually a fluffy question mark, was tucked tight between her legs. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the darkened hallway leading to the bedroom. She wasn't looking at a specific point, but rather at the space itself, as if observing a heat haze I couldn't perceive. A shiver traced its way down my spine, colder than any draft. Mittens was reacting to something I couldn't see, but she could. My heart began to pound, a familiar, sickening rhythm. I swallowed, my throat suddenly parched. The metallic taste flared in my mouth, sharp and acrid. I didn't move, I just watched Mittens, hoping her gaze would somehow solidify whatever was out there, make it visible to me. But she remained motionless, a frozen statue of fear, her small body trembling almost imperceptibly. Then the lights in the apartment flickered. Once, twice, not a full blackout, just a brief, unsettling dimming that made the shadows dance wildly for a split second. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen faltered, then returned to its steady thrum. It was barely noticeable, the kind of thing one might attribute to old wiring or a power surge, but in that moment, it felt like a deliberate punctuation mark. Mittens let out a low, guttural growl, a sound I'd only ever heard her make at an aggressive stray dog. Her fur bristled, and she launched herself off the armchair, not towards me for comfort, but away, scrambling under the sofa with a terrified yowl. I was alone again, and the thing that had caused her fear, that thing in the hallway, now had my undivided attention. My eyes strained into the darkness of the hall. Nothing, just the deeper black of the unlit space. My rational mind screamed that I was imagining things, that the cat was just being a cat, the lights a fluke. But the primal terror that seized me was far too real to be dismissed. I reached for the small, battery-powered lantern, my fingers fumbling with the switch. The feeble glow it cast did little to dispel the shadows, merely pushing them back a few feet. I gripped it tight, my knuckles white, and slowly, agonizingly stood up. My legs felt heavy, like they were made of lead. Every muscle screamed in protest. I took a hesitant step towards the hallway. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't articulate what I expected to see, but the fear was overwhelming. The metallic taste intensified, almost burning on my tongue. And then the pressure in my head returned, a dull throb that quickly escalated into a sharp, searing pain, focused right behind my eyes. My vision blurred. And then I heard it, a whisper not of sand, but of something else. It was so faint, so delicate, it felt less like a sound and more like a thought, brushing against the edges of my perception. It was the same long, drawn-out sigh I'd heard in the desert, but this time it was unmistakably coming from my bedroom, from my apartment. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a gasp. This wasn't a dream, this wasn't paranoia, it was here, it was inside. A sudden, fierce resolve born of pure terror snapped something inside me. I had to know, I had to see. I couldn't live like this, haunted by unseen whispers and phantom sand. I pushed forward one slow, deliberate step after another, the small lantern beam trembling in my outstretched hand. The pressure in my head built to an unbearable crescendo, making my teeth ache. Each breath was a shallow gasp. I reached the threshold of my bedroom. The room was dark, but the faint city glow from outside the window provided just enough ambient light to make out shapes. My bed, the dresser, the small armchair, all normal. But then I saw it. At the foot of my bed, where the duvet lay rumpled, was a patch of sand. Not a small pile this time. This was a trail, a distinct, narrow line of impossibly fine white sand winding its way from the open bedroom window across the carpet and culminating in a small, shimmering spiral right on my pillow. My eyes widened in disbelief. The window, it had been shut, locked. I always made sure it was. And yet there it was, slightly ajar, a faint breeze rustling the curtains. And then, within the spiral of sand on my pillow, something began to shimmer. It was the same heat haze distortion I had seen at the top of the dune, but condensed, localized. And within that shimmering distortion, a faint outline began to form. It was impossibly thin, almost two-dimensional, like a drawing in the air. It was very tall, even when condensed to the size of a pillow. I could make out the barest suggestion of those multiple blade-like limbs shifting and turning within the distortion. And the eyes, a cluster of dark obsidian shards, multifaceted and ancient, coalescing within the shimmering void. They were fixed on me, cold and utterly devoid of emotion. The mental voice, clear as a bell, echoed in my mind, the pressure in my head now a white-hot agony. You seek answers. My knees buckled. I fell to the floor, dropping the lantern. It clattered, extinguished, plunging the room into near-total darkness. Only the faint, shimmering presence on my pillow provided any visual anchor. My breath came in ragged sobs. This wasn't a dream. This was real. It was here. It was communicating with me. The voice, cold and ancient, resonated again, more insistent this time. You intrude, you observe, you seek. We observe, we warn, you persist. I scrambled back away from the bed, my hands scrabbling against the carpet, desperate to put distance between myself and that terrible, shimmering form. My mind was a whirlwind of terror and impossible questions. What did it want? What was it? As I retreated, the shimmering distortion on my pillow flickered, intensified, and then, with an almost imperceptible pop, it vanished. The trail of sand remained, but the entity was gone. The pressure in my head subsided, leaving a dull, throbbing ache. I lay there on the floor, curled into a ball, shaking uncontrollably for what felt like hours. The terror was absolute, paralyzing. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call anyone who would believe me. With the first pale hint of dawn filtering through the curtains, a fragile sense of clarity began to seep through my fear. I was not safe. My apartment, my sanctuary, was compromised. This wasn't just a psychological haunting, it was a physical intrusion. The entity had found me, followed me, and was now actively engaging with me. I forced myself up, my body stiff and aching, every muscle screaming in protest. I stumbled to the bedroom, my eyes fixed on the sand trail. It was still there, undeniable proof of the night's impossible events. I carefully, almost reverently, scooped a small amount of the impossibly fine sand into a plastic baggie from my kitchen. This wasn't just ordinary desert sand. It was too fine, too luminous. It was different. My first instinct was to run, to pack a bag, get in my car, and drive until I was so far away no desert shadow could ever find me. But where would I go? It had found me in the city, miles from its apparent domain. There was no escaping it. No, running wasn't an option. If it wanted me gone, truly gone, it could have done more than leave a warning. The messages, the sand, the dreams, the whispers, the direct communication, it all pointed to something else. A warning, a persistent, increasingly aggressive warning. But why me? Why was it so interested in me? I was just a photographer, an accidental trespasser. The memory of its words echoed in my mind. You seek answers. Maybe that was it, my curiosity, my persistent desire to understand the impossible, to capture the unseen even after the initial terror. Even in my dreams, I had been searching, replaying the events, trying to make sense of them. I hadn't truly forgotten or moved on. I had been observing. A new, unsettling thought began to form. What if this wasn't just about my trespass? What if it was about what I had seen? What if my encounter wasn't just a random event, but something significant, something it wanted to keep hidden? I spent the next few days in a state of hyper-awareness, a permanent knot of dread in my stomach. I cleaned my apartment meticulously, scrubbing away every trace of the sand, repairing the window lock. I bought a new, more powerful flashlight and even a small, motion-activated camera to place in the hallway, though I doubted it would capture anything truly tangible. I tried to go back to my routine, to my job as a freelance web designer, but my focus was shattered. Every client interaction felt like an impossible task. My thoughts kept circling back to the desert, to the entity, to its silent words. I needed information, desperately. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I started my research online, cautiously at first, using anonymous browsing and VPNs. I searched for Mojave Desert strange phenomena, unexplained desert disappearances, ancient desert entities, sand creatures folklore. Most of what I found was conspiracy theories, alien abduction stories, and local legends about skinwalkers or jinn, none of which quite fit the description of what I had seen. The multifaceted eyes, the blade-like limbs, the shimmering, non-solid form, the mind voice, it was unique. Then I broadened my search to ancient civilizations, forgotten languages, anything that might speak of beings that defied conventional biology. I delved into esoteric texts, fringe science articles, and paranormal forums. It was a rabbit hole of speculation and wild theories, but I was desperate for any thread that might lead me to a shred of understanding. The pressure in my head would return sporadically during these research sessions, a dull throb that felt like a warning. Sometimes I'd swear I could hear a faint, almost imperceptible hum like the one I'd heard above my tent just at the edge of my hearing. The metallic taste was almost constant now. One evening, deep into my research, I stumbled upon an obscure academic paper. It wasn't about the Mojave, but about ancient pictographs found in a remote, unexplored cave system in the Australian outback. The paper, written by an eccentric and largely dismissed anthropologist, detailed carvings depicting tall, angular figures with multiple limbs and clusters of eyes, often surrounded by symbols that the author interpreted as shifting earth or liquid light. My blood ran cold. The description, though vague, was chillingly close to what I had seen. The anthropologist had theorized that these figures were not deities or mythical beasts, but depictions of an ancient, sentient life form capable of manipulating its physical state and interacting with minds. He called them chthonic shapers, beings of the earth, able to shape and move the very ground beneath our feet. The paper went on to suggest that these entities were incredibly rare, perhaps dormant for millennia, only surfacing under specific conditions or in response to certain stimuli. The author speculated that they might be attracted to profound, undisturbed silence or perhaps to certain electromagnetic frequencies. I felt a jolt of recognition. Profound, undisturbed silence. My chosen spot in the Mojave. My photography equipment, the solar panel, the laptop, the satellite phone, all generating electromagnetic frequencies. Had I inadvertently woken something, attracted its attention? As I read, the pressure in my head intensified. The metallic taste in my mouth became unbearable. I felt a chill despite the warmth of my apartment. I knew I was getting too close. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. This paper felt like a direct link, a terrifying confirmation. The entity wasn't just a figment of my imagination or a local spook. It was something that had been glimpsed and feared by humans across continents and millennia. I needed to find this anthropologist, Dr. Elias Vance. The paper was old, published almost 30 years ago. He was probably retired or worse, but I had to try. He was the only one who seemed to have understood, even partially, what I was dealing with. The next morning, driven by a desperate urgency, I started digging for any contact information for Dr. Vance. It took days of relentless searching, sifting through academic archives, old university directories, and obscure forums. Eventually, I found a lead, a small, almost forgotten online forum dedicated to fringe archaeology and cryptozoology, where a user with a similar name had posted a few years prior. The last post mentioned an email address long since defunct, but it also mentioned a remote research facility in Arizona, where Vance was supposedly still conducting his eccentric studies. Arizona, close to the Mojave, a wave of both hope and dread washed over me. Going to Arizona meant getting closer to the desert, getting closer to it, but staying put felt like waiting for the inevitable. I decided I would go. I had to. I packed a small bag, leaving most of my possessions behind. I withdrew all my savings, packed my most reliable camera without any intention of taking photos, just as a comfort, the plastic baggie of sand and my new, powerful flashlight. I left a vague note for my landlord and a friend, just in case, saying I was taking an extended trip for a new photography project. I deliberately didn't mention where. Before I left, I went to Mittens, who had been unusually clingy and agitated since that night. I knelt and stroked her fur, feeling a pang of guilt. "Stay safe, girl," I whispered, burying my face in her soft fur. She purred, a rough, rumbling sound, but her eyes were still wide and watchful. I arranged for a trusted neighbor to look after her, making up a story about an urgent family matter. The drive was long and filled with annoying anxiety. I stuck to major highways, avoiding anything that hinted at desolate stretches of land. Every time a distant rock formation caught my eye or the sun glinted off a far-off hill, I felt a jolt of fear, half expecting to see that shimmering presence or a ripple in the ground. The metallic taste in my mouth was a constant companion now. The pressure in my head was a dull, persistent ache, like a headache that never quite faded. I knew it was a sign, a constant connection to whatever had touched me. After 2 days of relentless driving, I reached the small, dusty town closest to the research facility. It was a blink-and-you-miss-it kind of place, a few gas stations, a diner, and a motley collection of faded motels. I checked into one, opting for a ground-floor room that faced away from the open desert. The research facility was even more remote than I had imagined. It was located deep within a desolate mesa, accessible only by a single, winding dirt road. It wasn't marked on any public maps, and the satellite imagery I'd managed to find online showed little more than a cluster of nondescript buildings blending seamlessly into the arid landscape. It felt less like a scientific outpost and more like a secret base. The next morning, armed with a newfound determination, I set out. The dirt road was even worse than the one leading to my old desert spot, a series of switchbacks and rocky ascents that tested the limits of my old Jeep. The air was thick with dust, and the silence, though not as profound as the Mojave, still felt heavy and watchful. I kept my eyes peeled, sweeping the horizon, trying to suppress the rising panic. The landscape here felt different, harsher, more ancient. It was a place that felt like it held many secrets. After an hour of white-knuckle driving, I saw it. A low, camouflaged compound nestled against the base of a mesa. A chain-link fence topped with razor wire surrounded the perimeter, and a formidable-looking gate, adorned with a no trespassing sign, blocked the entrance. There was no guard booth, no obvious sign of life, just the silent, imposing gate. I parked my Jeep a discreet distance away, out of sight from the compound, and approached on foot. As I neared the gate, I noticed a small, almost invisible security camera mounted on a pole. I knew I couldn't just walk in. I stood there for a long time, contemplating my next move. Breaking in wasn't an option. I needed to approach this carefully, rationally, if that was even possible anymore. I decided to try a direct approach, however unlikely it might be. I walked up to the gate, stood directly in front of the camera, and waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The sun beat down relentlessly. The silence was broken only by the buzzing of insects and the frantic thumping of my own heart. Just as I was about to give up, a crackle of static broke the stillness. A voice, tinny and distorted, emanated from a hidden speaker near the gate. "State your business." The voice was male, gruff, and held no trace of welcome. "My name is Alex. I'm looking for Dr. Elias Vance," I called out, my voice a little shaky. "It's urgent. I believe he can help me with an unusual phenomenon." A beat of silence, then a low chuckle devoid of humor. "Dr. Vance doesn't help people, young lady. He studies, and he doesn't entertain unusual phenomena from random strangers." "Please," I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. "I've read his paper on chthonic shapers. I've encountered one. It followed me from the Mojave. It's communicating with me." Another, longer silence. This one was heavier, more considering. I could almost feel the unseen person on the other end assessing my words, my tone. Then the voice returned, colder now. "How do you know that term, chthonic shapers?" "I found his paper," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "The one about the Australian pictographs, the description, it matches what I saw, what I'm experiencing." There was another long pause filled with static. I held my breath, every nerve ending tingling. This was it. Either they'd dismiss me as a lunatic, or I'd finally found someone who understood. "Wait there," the voice finally said, curtly. "Do not attempt to move closer to the gate. Do not attempt to bypass security. You will be observed." I exhaled a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Observed, of course. I stood perfectly still, my eyes scanning the desert landscape, a renewed sense of unease settling over me. What kind of research facility was this, and what kind of man was Dr. Vance? After another 15 minutes that felt like an hour, the heavy metal gate slowly, with a grinding screech, began to slide open. It revealed a gravel road leading into the compound, lined by more security cameras and what looked like motion sensors. A figure emerged from one of the buildings. He was a man in his late 60s, perhaps early 70s, tall and gaunt, with a shock of wild white hair that seemed to defy gravity. His face was deeply lined, tanned by years in the sun, and his eyes, though sharp and intelligent, held a weary, almost haunted look. He wore a rumpled lab coat over a faded plaid shirt and cargo pants. This had to be Dr. Vance. He walked with a slight limp, carrying a heavy, ancient-looking camera on a strap over his shoulder. He stopped a few yards from the gate, his gaze fixed on me, intense and probing. "You say you've encountered one." His voice was raspy, but held a surprising authority. "A chthonic shaper." "Yes, sir," I replied, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. In the Mojave, it was impossible. It spoke to me in my mind. I pointed to the plastic baggie in my hand. "I even have some of its traces." His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify, curiosity, perhaps, or a renewed spark of an old obsession. He glanced at the baggie, then back at me. "Come in," he said, gesturing with a bony hand, "and tell me everything. But understand this, once you step inside, there's no turning back. You'll be part of this, whether you like it or not. The information you possess, it's not something we take lightly." His words were a chilling warning, but I felt a desperate need for answers overriding any fear. I had no other choice. I walked through the now open gate, the metallic screech echoing in the vast silence, and stepped into a world even stranger than the one I had just left. The gate slid shut behind me with a heavy thud, sealing me inside. The compound was small, consisting of 3 main buildings: a large, utilitarian-looking laboratory, a smaller residential quarter, and a storage shed. The ground was hard-packed earth, dotted with scientific equipment I couldn't identify, parabolic dishes pointed at the sky, strange antenna arrays, and various sensors embedded in the ground. Dr. Vance led me into the main laboratory building. The interior was a chaotic mess of scientific equipment, overflowing bookshelves, diagrams scribbled on whiteboards, and countless rock samples. The air hummed with the faint, rhythmic whir of machinery. It smelled of ozone, dust, and old paper. He waved me to a chair, a rickety wooden stool amidst the clutter, and then took his own seat behind a massive, cluttered desk, clearing a space among stacks of papers and archaic-looking recording devices. "Start from the beginning," he commanded, his eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. "Every detail. Do not omit anything, however trivial it may seem. Everything is a data point." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands, and then I began to tell my story. I recounted the isolation in the Mojave, the initial whisper of sand, the escalating terror, the dead satellite phone, the shimmering presence on the dune, the inexplicable vehicle breakdown, the chase, the climb onto the boulders, the entity's full manifestation, its silent voice, and the chilling warning. As I spoke, Dr. Vance listened intently, occasionally interjecting with a sharp question or a request for clarification. He didn't express disbelief, not once. Instead, his reactions were those of a scientist piecing together a complex puzzle. A nod here, a jotted note there, a flicker of understanding in his weary eyes. When I reached the part about the entity appearing in my apartment, the sand trail, the open window, and its chilling message, he leaned forward, his gaze even more intense. "And the pressure in your head," he prompted, "the metallic taste. Are you experiencing those now?" Yes, I admitted, surprised he'd asked. Constantly, almost. It gets worse when I'm stressed or when I feel its presence. He nodded slowly. Residual resonance, a psychic imprint, if you will. The shapers communicate not through sound waves, but through direct neural induction. It's a form of telepathy, but far more invasive. It's how they speak to the land, how they influence its geological structure. He paused, looking at the baggie of sand in my hand. May I see that? I handed him the baggie. He took it with surprising gentleness, holding it up to the light, then pouring a small amount onto a microscope slide. He placed it under a high-powered electron microscope and peered into the eyepieces. Extraordinary, he murmured, almost to himself. Perfectly crystalline, highly organized molecular structure, not natural quartz, not even terrestrial by most definitions. He looked up at me, a strange glint in his eyes. This isn't sand, Alex, not really, it's part of them. A physical manifestation of their energetic field condensed into a stable form. My mind reeled, part of them, so they are made of sand or light. Neither and both, he explained, leaning back, a rare, almost manic energy sparking in his eyes. They are what I call geomorphic entities, beings that exist in a state of mutable physicality. They can coalesce from the surrounding environment, sand, rock, earth, and then return to it. They are, in essence, living earth, but their consciousness, their true form, is energetic. The shimmer you saw, the light, that's their energy field, interacting with our visible spectrum. But what are they? I pressed, my voice barely a whisper. And why me? Vance sighed, running a hand through his wild hair. Ancient, that's the simplest answer. Older than recorded history, perhaps even older than most life on this planet. They've been here for eons, dormant, observing, shaping. The Aboriginal pictographs I studied depict them as creators and destroyers, beings that carve mountains and sink continents. As for why you, he fixed me with his intense gaze. You stumbled upon a territory they consider sacred, a place where their presence is strongest. You stayed too long, you observed too intently, and your technology, particularly your satellite phone, your camera's active sensors, likely interfered with their subtle energetic resonance. They don't appreciate intrusion. They are solitary, territorial beings. They warned you subtly at first, then more aggressively. And when you persisted, when you sought answers, you became a focal point. They perceive your curiosity as a threat or perhaps an unusual opportunity for observation. Opportunity for observation, I repeated, feeling a chill. Indeed, he nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. You are, whether you like it or not, now a conduit, a human antenna, if you will. You are experiencing their effects, their communication, more directly than anyone I've ever encountered. And for a man like me, who has dedicated his entire life to understanding these entities, you are an invaluable, if unfortunate, specimen. His words hit me like a physical blow. Specimen, that's all I was to him, a means to an end. But despite the coldness of his assessment, I felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't crazy. Everything I'd experienced was real, and someone finally believed me. So what do? I asked, my voice barely audible. How do I make them leave me alone? Vance leaned back, his gaze distant, lost in thought. That, my dear Alex, is the million-dollar question. Once a shaper has fixed its attention on you, it is tenacious. They don't forget. They don't forgive trespass easily. He tapped a finger on the desk. They want you gone, not just from the desert, but from their sphere of influence. They may even want you to stop seeking answers, stop understanding them. But you're still alive, I pointed out, and you've been studying them for years. Ah, but I am careful, he said, a weary glint in his eyes. I never directly intrude, I observe from a distance. I decode ancient messages, analyze geological anomalies, detect their energetic signatures. I don't engage, and I certainly don't collect their sand. He gestured to the baggie. That was a bold and perhaps foolish move. So I'm just supposed to live with this? I asked, a wave of despair washing over me. The dreams, the sand, the pressure, the feeling of being watched. For now, he replied, his expression softening slightly. We need to understand their current intent. The fact that they followed you, that they are communicating with you so directly, it indicates an escalation. They are testing you, pushing your boundaries, and perhaps they are trying to influence you. Influence me how? To return to them, Vance said slowly, his voice low. Or to become something else, something they can interact with more directly. Remember their words, you seek answers. And this place is not for you. Leave, and do not return. There's a duality there. They want you gone, but they are also drawing you in. Your trespass might have opened a channel, a connection that they are now exploring. A cold dread seeped into my bones. You mean they want to possess me or change me? Vance shrugged, a gesture of profound weariness. It's difficult to say. Their motivations, their consciousness, operate on a scale we can barely comprehend. They are not malevolent in a human sense, but they are utterly alien. Their existence is beyond our morality, our understanding of life and death. To them, we are ephemeral, fragile things. So what's next? I asked, feeling a strange mix of resignation and a desperate need for action. You stay here, Vance declared, his tone firm. For your safety and for our research, we will monitor you, we will analyze your experiences, we will try to understand this connection you've formed. Perhaps with enough data, we can find a way to sever it, or at the very least to shield you. As I looked around the cluttered, humming lab, it was far from comforting, but it offered the only glimmer of hope I had. And if I don't? Vance met my gaze, his eyes ancient and knowing. Then you will remain a beacon, Alex, a curiosity, and sooner or later their observation will escalate beyond mere messages and dreams. They will take what they want. They always do eventually if they are not appeased or driven away. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. I was trapped, but at least, for the first time in years, I wasn't entirely alone in my terror. Okay, I said, my voice hoarse. I'll stay. What do you need me to do? Over the next few days, I became a reluctant subject in Dr. Vance's bizarre research. My days were a blur of examinations, interviews, and monitoring. He had a small team, I discovered, 2 quiet, intense young scientists named Dr. Lena Petrova, a biophysicist, and Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a specialist in geological electromagnetism. They were equally dedicated, equally obsessive, but thankfully far less intimidating than Vance. Lena was meticulous, constantly hooking me up to various sensors, EEGs, galvanic skin response monitors, heart rate trackers, all designed to measure my physiological reactions to the entity's presence. Kenji, meanwhile, was focused on detecting subtle environmental shifts around me, setting up portable electromagnetic field detectors and advanced seismic sensors in my temporary quarters. My temporary quarters was a Spartan room in the residential building, equipped with a bed, a small desk, and a surprisingly robust Faraday cage built into the walls. Vance explained it was to try and limit the entity's ability to resonate with me, though he admitted it was more of an experiment than a proven solution. The pressure in my head was a constant, dull throb, occasionally flaring into an intense ache during my dreams, which continued with terrifying regularity. The dreams were no longer fragmented. They were clear, vivid replays of my desert encounter, often ending with the entity's multifaceted eyes fixed on me, its silent voice echoing, "You seek answers." Lena and Kenji were particularly fascinated by the metallic taste in my mouth, taking regular blood and saliva samples. "It's not an external contaminant," Lena mused, peering into a microscope one afternoon. "Your system is producing something, a unique enzymatic reaction perhaps in response to the neurological stimuli. Or maybe," she added, her eyes gleaming with scientific excitement, "it's a very subtle, internalized manifestation of their influence. A precursor to something more profound." Her words sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Vance, meanwhile, spent hours with me, meticulously documenting every dream, every feeling, every instance of the sand whispers or the whirring. He cross-referenced my experiences with his extensive archives of ancient texts, historical accounts of unexplained geological events, and encrypted government reports he had somehow acquired. He believed my connection to the entity was evolving, becoming something new, and he was determined to chart its course. "Their influence isn't always overt," Vance explained one evening, sketching diagrams on a whiteboard. "Sometimes it's subtle, subliminal. They can induce emotional states, influence decision-making, even alter perception. They are masters of the mind space, and they are using you to understand us just as we are trying to understand them." "So they're experimenting on me?" I asked, my voice tight with anger and fear. "In a way," he conceded without a hint of remorse. "But it's reciprocal. You are learning about them too. This connection is a two-way street, whether you like it or not. The more you experience, the more you understand, the more data we collect. And the more we understand, the better our chances of finding a solution for you." His pragmatism was chilling, but I had to admit there was a twisted logic to it. My fear was still present, a constant knot in my stomach, but I accepted Vance's chilling pragmatism. My fear was still present, a constant knot in my stomach, but it was now laced with a desperate need for answers, for understanding. The isolation of my terror had been replaced by a communal, albeit scientific, obsession. I was a specimen, yes, but also a crucial link, a bridge to an incomprehensible reality. Over the next few weeks, life at the facility settled into a bizarre routine. My days were a blur of examinations, interviews, and monitoring. Lena, the biophysicist, was meticulous, constantly hooking me up to various sensors: EEGs to measure my brain activity, galvanic skin response monitors to track my stress levels, heart rate trackers, and even a unique device designed to detect subtle shifts in my internal energetic field. She was particularly fascinated by the metallic taste in my mouth, which had become almost constant. Regular blood and saliva samples were taken, analyzed, and reanalyzed. "It's not an external contaminant," Lena mused one afternoon, her eyes glued to a microscope screen. "Your system is producing something, a unique enzymatic reaction perhaps in response to the neurological stimuli. Or maybe," she added, her eyes gleaming with scientific excitement, "it's a very subtle, internalized manifestation of their influence, a precursor to something more profound." Her words sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Kenji, the electromagnetism specialist, focused on the external environment. He had wired my Spartan room in the residential building, my temporary quarters, with an array of portable electromagnetic field detectors and advanced seismic sensors. The room itself was a surprisingly robust Faraday cage, a wire mesh embedded in the walls, floor, and ceiling, designed to block electromagnetic fields. Vance explained it was an attempt to limit the entity's ability to resonate with me, though he admitted it was more of an experiment than a proven solution. Kenji believed the Shapers used or manipulated specific frequencies, and the Faraday cage might, in theory, disrupt their more subtle forms of communication. Despite the shielding, the pressure in my head was a constant, dull throb, occasionally flaring into an intense ache, especially during my dreams. My dreams continued with terrifying regularity. They were no longer fragmented. They were clear, vivid replays of my desert encounter, often ending with the entity's multifaceted eyes fixed on me, its silent voice echoing, "You seek answers." Sometimes the dreams took on a new, more abstract quality. Visions of swirling sandstorms that formed into impossible geometries, deep caverns filled with resonant hums, or the slow, deliberate rise and fall of ancient landmasses, all narrated by that same cold, alien thought voice. Vance, meanwhile, spent hours with me, meticulously documenting every dream, every feeling, every instance of the sand whispers or the whirring. He cross-referenced my experiences with his extensive archives of ancient texts, historical accounts of unexplained geological events, and encrypted government reports he had somehow acquired. He believed my connection to the entity was evolving, becoming something new, and he was determined to chart its course. "Their influence isn't always overt," Vance explained one evening, sketching diagrams on a whiteboard. "Sometimes it's subtle, subliminal. They can induce emotional states, influence decision-making, even alter perception. They are masters of the mind space, and they are using you to understand us just as we are trying to understand them." "So they're experimenting on me?" I asked, my voice tight with anger and fear. "In a way," he conceded, without a hint of remorse. "But it's reciprocal. You are learning about them, too. This connection is a two-way street, whether you like it or not. The more you experience, the more you understand, the more data we collect. And the more we understand, the better our chances of finding a solution for you." His pragmatism was chilling, but I had to admit there was a twisted logic to it. My fear was still present, a constant knot in my stomach, but it was now interlaced with a strange, almost morbid fascination. I was learning about the Shapers, yes, but also about myself, about the fragile boundaries of my perception and sanity. One morning, after a particularly vivid dream where the Shaper's eyes had seemed to pierce through me, I woke with a gasp. My room was dim, the reinforced curtains blocking out most of the desert sun. I sat up, heart pounding, the metallic taste in my mouth almost overpowering. And then I saw it. A small, perfectly symmetrical spiral of impossibly fine white sand sat in the center of my bedside table. It gleamed faintly in the dim light, a stark white against the dark wood. My blood ran cold. The Faraday cage was supposed to prevent this. The door had been locked from the inside. The window was a solid, unopenable pane of reinforced glass. I stared at it, transfixed, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't a natural occurrence. This was a deliberate act of intrusion. It meant the Shaper could bypass their most advanced defenses. It meant it was closer than ever. I snatched up the plastic baggie of sand I still kept from my apartment, carefully pouring the new pile into it. My hands trembled. When I presented it to Vance, Lena, and Kenji, their reactions were a mixture of alarm and scientific exhilaration. "Impossible," Kenji murmured, scrutinizing the sand under a powerful magnifying glass. "The M field inside your room is virtually flat. No resonant frequencies detected that could facilitate transport." Lena, ever the biophysicist, looked at me with a new intensity. The Shaper isn't just projecting, it's manifesting, and it's doing so inside what should be a secure environment. This suggests a direct interface, Alex. A bridge it is building, or perhaps already has, directly through you. Vance, for his part, looked grim. It's testing us, pushing boundaries. It's a statement. You cannot contain me. You cannot stop me. But also, I am still here. I am still watching. He paused, his gaze distant. The appearance of the sand is a physical anchor for its energetic presence. It's a way for it to solidify its influence, even in a shielded space. The incident deepened my unease, but it also spurred the team to new levels of activity. They began to experiment with various countermeasures, all focused on me. I was subjected to sonic frequencies, electromagnetic pulses, and even a brief, uncomfortable session in a sensory deprivation tank, all to see if any of these could disrupt the resonance between me and the Shaper. None of them worked. The pressure in my head remained, the metallic taste persisted, and the dreams continued, though the sand piles stopped appearing for a while, almost as if the Shaper was assessing their response. Days bled into weeks. The desert outside the compound became less of a terrifying landscape and more of a constant, watchful presence. I started to notice subtle changes in the environment around the facility itself. The air sometimes felt unnaturally still, the light oddly refracted. The occasional dust devils that whipped across the mesa seemed to move with an almost deliberate grace, and I'd catch myself staring at the way the sand shifted in the wind, half expecting a ripple, a wave, a shimmering presence. Vance became increasingly focused on the idea of the Shaper's intent. It's not just a creature, he reiterated one evening, pacing the lab. It's a force of nature, a consciousness that operates on geological timescales. What does a being like that want from a human? It's not sustenance, not territory in our sense. Perhaps recognition or influence, control. He believed the Shaper was trying to understand me and, through me, humanity. He theorized that my initial intrusion might have been a unique catalyst, awakening a dormant curiosity in the ancient entity. You are an anomaly, Alex, a persistent, observant anomaly, and you've opened a door. One afternoon, a new layer was added to my unusual existence. Vance led me to a specialized chamber within the lab, a circular room with walls covered in strange, glowing symbols that hummed faintly. In the center was a chair, surrounded by more sensors and an elaborate projection system. This is our neural resonance chamber, Vance explained, a hint of excitement in his weary eyes. Lena and Kenji have been working on mapping the specific neurological frequencies associated with your connection to the Shaper. We believe we can create a simulated environment, a mindscape if you will, that allows us to directly observe your interaction with the entity, perhaps even to communicate with it, albeit indirectly. My stomach clenched. Communicate with it, isn't that dangerous? Extremely, he agreed without hesitation. But it's our best chance. We need to move beyond passive observation. We need to understand its language of thought, its intent. You are our Rosetta Stone, Alex. Lena stepped forward, a serious expression on her face. We've developed a series of biofeedback loops. Will project abstract visual and auditory stimuli that correspond to the patterns we've observed in your dreams and physical responses. Your brain waves, heart rate, and even galvanic skin response will influence the projection, creating a feedback system. The goal is to create a dialogue of sorts between your subconscious and the Shaper's presence, mediated by our technology. And if it tries to take over, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Kenji, standing by a control panel, injected reassuringly. We have multiple safety protocols. At any sign of extreme distress or if your neural activity deviates beyond preset parameters, we'll terminate the simulation immediately. The Faraday cage is heavily augmented in here, and we have redundant systems to break any connection. Despite their assurances, a cold knot of dread tightened in my chest. This felt like a monumental step, a deliberate leap into the unknown. But the alternative, to remain a passive recipient of the Shaper's escalating attention, was no longer tenable. I had to face it, to try and understand. Okay, I said, taking a deep breath. Let's do it. I sat in the chair, a cap adorned with electrodes placed on my head, wires snaked from my temples, wrists, and chest to various monitoring devices. Lena strapped me in gently, her movements precise. Vance stood by the main control panel, his gaze intense. "Remember, Alex," he said, his voice grave. "Focus, try to remain aware, report everything you experience, every thought, every sensation. You are exploring a new frontier." The lights dimmed. The chamber hummed with a low, resonant frequency. Abstract patterns of light began to swirl on the walls, faint at first, then growing more complex, shimmering with an ethereal glow. The air grew heavy, almost viscous. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified, a sharp, burning sensation. The pressure in my head built, not with the usual dull throb, but with a focused intensity, like a single, sharp point pressing against my skull. My vision blurred at the edges, the projected patterns seeming to merge with my own perception. A whisper of sand, faint but undeniable, seeped into my awareness. It wasn't a sound from the speakers, it was in my mind, an echo of the desert. The swirling lights coalesced for a fleeting moment into the familiar, undulating ripple of sand, gaining on me, vast and unstoppable. Then the patterns shifted. The shimmering heat haze formed, not on a distant dune, but right in front of me, vast and encompassing. And within it, the Shaper began to coalesce. It was taller, more imposing than I remembered, its impossible thinness stretching into the simulated void. The blade-like limbs glinted, shifting with an alien grace. The cluster of dark, multifaceted eyes at its apex spun slowly, all of them fixing on me simultaneously. The pressure in my head became a searing agony. The mental voice, clearer and stronger than ever, resonated through my entire being, bypassing my ears, my brain, going straight to the core of my consciousness. "You seek us, you enter our space, we observe, you reveal." The words weren't just understood, they were understanding, poured directly into my mind. I felt a wave of profound knowledge, not just about the entity, but about the very fabric of existence, a fleeting glimpse into geological time, into the slow, deliberate shaping of worlds. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and utterly captivating. I tried to speak, to ask a question, but my throat was constricted. I felt paralyzed, my body unresponsive. Only my mind, my consciousness, remained active, a silent, screaming observer. The Shaper's form intensified, becoming almost solid, yet still retaining that impossible, shifting quality. Its blade-like limbs, once merely points of reflected light, now seemed to possess a delicate, intricate structure, made of countless, perfectly interlocked crystalline fragments. And then one of the limbs began to extend, slowly, deliberately, towards me. It was not a hostile movement, not an attack, but a gesture of profound curiosity and exploration. The point of the limb shimmered, twisting, and seemed to reach for my forehead, for the exact point where the pressure in my head was most intense. Panic seized me. This was too much. This was beyond simulation. I felt a profound sense of violation, an intrusion into the very sanctity of my mind, my being. "Stop," I screamed or tried to scream. No sound came out. But my distress registered on the monitors. Lena's voice, distant and urgent, cut through the haze of terror. "Alex, your neural activity is spiking. We're pulling you out." The shaper's advancing limb paused, seemed to hesitate, its faceted eyes fixed on me. The mental voice echoed, softer this time, but still imbued with that ancient, cold knowing. "The door is open. You have invited." Then, with a sudden, jarring jolt, the swirling lights vanished. The pressure in my head receded, leaving a blinding headache and a profound sense of disorientation. I gasped, my eyes snapping open. I was back in the chamber, the harsh fluorescent lights of the lab now glaring down on me. Lena was already at my side, unstrapping me, her face pale with concern. Kenji was at the control panel, rapidly punching commands. Vance stood over me, his face grim. "Alex, are you all right?" Lena asked, her voice strained. I tried to nod, but my head throbbed. It was real. It touched me. It tried to... I trailed off, unable to articulate the sensation. Vance knelt beside me, his eyes piercing. "What did it say? What did it show you?" "It said, 'The door is open. You have invited,'" I choked out, still trembling. "And it showed me things, worlds being shaped, time." Vance exhaled slowly, running a hand through his wild hair. "It's evolving. Its interaction with you is becoming more direct, more intimate. It's using your mind as a bridge, a portal, and it believes you've welcomed it." The full weight of his words crashed down on me. I hadn't invited it. I had been trying to escape it. But my curiosity, my desperate search for answers, my very presence in this research facility had been perceived as an invitation. My sanctuary, my mind, was no longer my own. The entity had found its way in. The next few days were a blur of intense discussions, frantic analyses, and growing alarm among the team. The neural resonance chamber, despite its supposed safety protocols, had proven to be a direct conduit, not just for observation, but for profound, intimate contact. Lena and Kenji were struggling to understand how the Shaper could have bypassed their extensive shielding and directly influenced my consciousness to such a degree. "It's like it perceives our attempts to contain it as merely another form of interaction," Kenji explained, frustrated, pointing at complex waveforms on a screen. "The Faraday cage, the neural feedback, it just adapted. It leveraged the energy we were using to observe it, turning it into a channel for its own agenda." Vance, however, seemed to see the encounter not just as a setback, but as a breakthrough, albeit a dangerous one. "It's confirming my hypothesis. The Shapers are not just physical entities, they are consciousness. They operate on a different plane of existence, one that interfaces directly with thought and awareness. Our physical barriers are irrelevant to their true form." My own state was precarious. The headache was constant, a dull ache behind my eyes that occasionally flared into blinding pain. The metallic taste in my mouth was now so persistent it felt like part of my own chemistry. The dreams were no longer replays, they were active, ongoing dialogues. I'd wake up with fragments of alien thoughts swirling in my mind, glimpses of vast, ancient landscapes, and an unsettling sense of shared awareness. The feeling of being watched was no longer a vague paranoia, it was a certainty. I felt the Shaper's presence not just as an external observer, but as something woven into the very fabric of my being. It was inside my head, perceiving through my senses, thinking alongside my thoughts. Vance decided on a radical new approach. We need to understand its true nature, he declared one evening, addressing the team and me. Its motivations, its purpose. We can't just run from it or shield from it. We need to actively engage to open a true channel of communication, but on our terms. He outlined his plan, a new enhanced neural interface, one that wouldn't just observe my reactions, but would allow for a more structured two-way exchange. He called it the symbiotic communication protocol. The idea was to create a shared mental space, a carefully controlled environment where my consciousness and the Shaper's presence could interact with mediated safeguards. Alex, Vance looked at me, his eyes burning with an almost feverish intensity. You are our unique asset. Your mind has already formed the connection. We need you to go back in. But this time, you won't just be an observer, you will be an ambassador. The thought filled me with an equal mix of dread and a strange, powerful compulsion. The fear was immense, but so was the desire to understand, to finally put an end to this torment. And perhaps, somewhere deep down, there was a nascent curiosity born of the Shaper's invasive presence. "What do you want me to ask it?" I finally managed, my voice surprisingly steady. Vance's gaunt face hardened with resolve. Everything, its origins, its kind, its purpose, and most importantly, why it has chosen to interact with you. Over the next week, the lab became a hive of activity. Kenji redesigned the neural interface, integrating new algorithms to process the complex thought forms they anticipated. Lena focused on creating a physiological feedback system that would allow me to maintain a degree of control, even in the depths of the shared mind space. They enhanced the Faraday shielding in the chamber, adding layers of exotic materials to try and contain the energetic overflow. I spent hours being trained, undergoing biofeedback exercises, learning mental techniques to center myself, to differentiate my thoughts from the Shaper's, to exert a semblance of control over my own consciousness. It was like learning to swim in an ocean of pure thought. The day of the symbiotic communication protocol arrived. I walked into the neural resonance chamber feeling a strange blend of fatalism and resolve. This was my fight now, my only path forward. I had to face it, to stare into the abyss and try to make sense of what stared back. As I sat in the chair, the familiar cap with electrodes placed on my head, I felt a new sensation. It wasn't just the pressure or the taste. It was an awareness, a faint, almost anticipatory hum, a sense that the Shaper was already aware, already waiting. Lena went through the final checks. Kenji monitored the energy readouts. Vance stood by the main console, his face etched with a mixture of apprehension and profound scientific hunger. "Remember your training, Alex," Vance's voice was low, steady. "Maintain your center, define your boundaries. You are in control of your side of the interface. We are here, monitoring your every parameter. At any sign of danger, we will terminate." The lights dimmed. The chamber hummed, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to penetrate my bones. The swirling patterns began on the walls, more intricate this time, responding to the subtle shifts in my own brainwaves. The metallic taste flared, sharp, and acrid. The pressure in my head intensified, a wave of familiar, cold awareness washing over me. I felt the shaper's presence coalesce not just as a visual projection, but as a direct, tangible entity within my consciousness. It manifested in the shared mental space as a vast, shimmering landscape of shifting sand and luminous, crystalline structures stretching into an infinite horizon. Above it, the sky was a swirling vortex of deep blues and purples, pierced by countless multifaceted eyes that glittered like distant stars. Then, from the heart of this impossible landscape, the shaper itself began to rise. Taller, grander, more fluid than I had ever seen it. Its blade-like limbs extended, not as weapons, but as extensions of the very environment, carving lines of light in the shifting dunes. The cluster of eyes at its apex seemed to spin faster, all of them focused on me. The mental voice resonated not just in my head, but through the entire mental landscape, a profound, ancient chord. You return, you seek deeper, we heed your call. I focused, remembering Lena's training. I visualized myself as a lighthouse, a beacon of my own consciousness, unyielding against the vastness of its presence. What are you? I projected, focusing my intent, shaping my thought into a clear question. It felt like speaking into a gale force wind. The shaper's form shifted, the landscape around it undulating in response. The mental voice returned, carrying a new layer of complexity, a sense of deep, layered meaning. We are the Earth's memory, the shaper of its skin, the voice of its deep silence. The Earth's memory, I focused, trying to parse the abstract concept. Are you sentient, a single being or many? We are consciousness bound to this sphere, many and one, individual and collective. We are the shifting, we are the still. It was answering, but in riddles, in concepts so vast they almost fractured my human mind. I felt a fleeting sense of despair, a realization of the immense gulf between our modes of being. Why me? I asked, focusing on the most immediate, pressing question. Why did you follow me? Why did you enter my mind? The shaper's form rippled. One of its blade-like limbs extended, not towards me this time, but towards a point in the shimmering mental landscape. As it moved, the landscape changed, coalescing into a vivid, crystal-clear memory. I saw myself, my Jeep, parked at the edge of the forbidden dune, my camera, its lens reflecting the vast, silent desert. I saw the initial flicker of light, the pressure in my head, the almost imperceptible hum. Then the scene shifted. I was no longer observing myself. I was experiencing it from the shaper's perspective. I felt a profound sense of ancient slumber, of a deep, silent watchfulness spanning millennia. Then a disruption. Not just my presence, but the subtle electromagnetic hum of my equipment, the focused intent of my observation, the active seeking of my human curiosity. You reached, you probed, you woke a resonance, a harmonic. The voice filled my mind, the words laced with a detached, almost scientific curiosity. The barrier thinned, the channel opened, we felt you, a singular, persistent echo. You felt me? I asked, struggling to understand. Like a frequency. A signature, a seeking, a resonance of awareness. Uncommon, intense, you desired to comprehend. This is rare among your kind. Most flee, most ignore. You returned, you sought. So my curiosity, it attracted you. It attuned you to our presence, to our thoughts. You became a receiver, an interface, a bridge. The implications were staggering. I hadn't just stumbled into something. I had, through my own unique intent, activated a connection. My desire to understand had created the very link that was now tormenting me. "What do you want from me now?" I projected, the question laced with a desperate urgency. The shaper's form seemed to grow, encompassing more of the mental landscape. The cluster of eyes swiveled, creating a dizzying, overwhelming focus. "To comprehend, to observe your kind, through the conduit you have become, to learn, to influence, to shape." Shape, a cold dread seeped into my mental space. Shape what? The understanding, the perception, the awareness. Your kind encroaches, your kind forgets, we remind, we reshape the surface, the consciousness. My mind reeled. It wasn't just observing me, it intended to influence me, and through me, perhaps, a larger human understanding. This wasn't just about my personal trespass, it was about something far, far greater. How I projected, my mental voice trembling. "What is your purpose?" The shaper's response was immediate, overwhelming. It wasn't words. It was a torrent of pure information, a flood of images, sensations, and concepts that poured directly into my mind. I saw vast geological epochs, continents shifting, mountains rising and falling like waves. I witnessed the slow, deliberate work of unseen forces, carving valleys, shaping coastlines, guiding the flow of subterranean rivers. I felt the immense, patient power of the earth itself, a living, breathing entity, constantly reforming, constantly evolving. And then I saw the shapers, not as individual entities, but as an interwoven network, a vast subterranean consciousness stretching across the globe. They were the architects, the silent sculptors, guiding the planet's geological evolution, maintaining a delicate balance. They perceived humanity as a fleeting, disruptive force, a superficial plague on the Earth's ancient skin. The final image that seared itself into my mind was of human cities, towering structures of glass and steel, slowly, inevitably, crumbling back into dust, reclaimed by the shifting sands, by the inexorable will of the earth. A profound, ancient silence settled over the ruins, and then the slow, deliberate work of reshaping began anew. It was not a threat, not an act of malice in the human sense. It was a statement of inevitability, a cosmic fact. I gasped, a strangled sound that barely escaped my lips. The sheer scale of what I had just witnessed, the indifferent, unimaginable power of these beings was crushing. "Terminate," Vance's voice, distant and urgent, cut through the overwhelming sensory input. "Neural activity critical. Alex, respond." I felt myself being pulled violently from the shared mental space. The shimmering landscape fractured. The faceted eyes exploded into 1,000 points of light. The overwhelming information dissolved into static. With a wrenching, nauseating jolt, I was back in the neural resonance chamber. The harsh fluorescent lights seemed blinding. Lena was at my side, unstrapping me, her face ghostly pale. Kenji was frantically working the console, his brow furrowed with alarm. Vance was already kneeling beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm. "Alex, are you all right?" Lena's voice was sharp with concern. "What happened? Your vital signs went critical." I couldn't speak. I lay back against the chair, panting, my entire body trembling. The metallic taste was unbearable, like I was tasting raw iron. The pressure in my head was a white-hot agony, threatening to split my skull. But worse than the physical pain was the absolute, crushing knowledge that had been forced upon me. The vision of human cities reduced to dust, the Shapers' indifferent geological timescale, their perception of humanity as mere fleeting specks on the Earth's ancient skin. They are the Earth's consciousness, I whispered, my voice hoarse, barely audible. They shape it, they see us as temporary, as a disturbance. Vance's face was grim. What else? What did they tell you? They said they want to influence, to reshape perception through me because I'm a bridge. I closed my eyes, the images still swirling behind my eyelids, the crushing inevitability of it all. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Lena looked horrified. Kenji slowly shook his head, a look of profound disbelief on his face. Vance, however, stared at me with an intense, almost maniacal glint in his eyes. So my hypothesis was correct, he murmured almost to himself. They are not just observing, they are interacting, and their ambition, it's beyond anything I imagined. He paused, his gaze fixed on me. Alex, you have become a nexus, a point of profound contact. They are not merely influencing you, they are attempting to make you a part of their collective consciousness, a human conduit through which they intend to speak to the world. The words sent a fresh wave of terror through me, colder and more profound than any physical threat. I wasn't just being haunted, I was being assimilated. My mind, my individuality, was being slowly, deliberately eroded, being reshaped into an instrument for an ancient, alien intelligence. No, I whispered the word, a desperate plea. No, I won't, I can't. Vance didn't respond immediately. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying mix of scientific triumph and a chilling disregard for my personal suffering. He saw only the data, the unprecedented opportunity. Lena, however, stepped forward, her hand on my arm. Dr. Vance, we have to pull her out of this. It's too dangerous, her mental state. Dangerous? Vance scoffed, turning to Lena. This is the most significant breakthrough in the history of xenogeology. Alex is providing us with direct, unfiltered insight into the consciousness of a chthonic shaper. This is not merely about her mental state. This is about understanding the very forces that shaped our planet. But at what cost? Lena countered, her voice rising. She's being overwhelmed, her mind is fracturing. I felt the dull throb in my head, the metallic taste, the subtle hum that now seemed to permeate my every thought. The Shaper's presence was still there, a vast, silent watcher, an internal colonizer. We need to disconnect her, Vance, Kenji interjected, his voice firm. Completely. This has gone beyond observation. She's actively being integrated. Vance hesitated, his gaze sweeping from me to the monitors, then back to my trembling form. The scientific hunger warred with a flicker of something almost human in his ancient eyes. Very well, he finally conceded, his voice grudging. For now, but this is not the end. This is just the beginning of our understanding. Alex, we need to monitor you intensely. The connection has been established. It cannot be fully severed, not without understanding the mechanism. We need to find a way to stabilize you, to allow you to retain your autonomy while still acting as our bridge. His words offered little comfort. I was a bridge, a nexus, a conduit. And the Shaper, the ancient consciousness of the earth, was now deeply, irrevocably within me. I was trapped, not just in this remote facility, but within my own mind, forever linked to something alien, powerful, and utterly indifferent to my humanity. The next few days were a blur of intense medical monitoring and psychological evaluation. Lena worked tirelessly, administering sedatives to help me sleep, trying to analyze the changes in my brain chemistry. Kenji scoured his data, looking for any anomaly, any pattern that might give them a foothold in understanding how the Shaper's consciousness had so deeply embedded itself. Vance, meanwhile, seemed to retreat into himself, poring over ancient texts and geological maps, muttering theories about planetary consciousness and geological sentience. He was fascinated, energized by the revelation, but also seemed aware of the immense, almost uncontrollable forces they had unleashed. My own internal state was a chaotic mess. The line between my thoughts and the Shaper's became increasingly blurred. I'd catch myself thinking in abstract concepts, perceiving the subtle shifts in the earth beneath the compound, feeling the vast, slow currents of geological time. The metallic taste and head pressure were constant, like a permanent scar. My dreams were a vivid, terrifying extension of my waking hours, filled with the Shaper's silent presence, its overwhelming data streams, its indifferent perception of humanity. I was losing myself, piece by piece, being subsumed. One evening, I woke with a gasp from a fitful sleep. The Faraday cage was supposed to dampen external influences, but it seemed to do little for what was now inside my head. My room was dark, but the usual deep black of night was replaced by a faint, shimmering luminescence emanating from the walls, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat. It wasn't light, it was a pure energetic emission, visible only to me. The air grew heavy, almost viscous, imbued with that familiar ozone scent. The metallic taste in my mouth was unbearable. The pressure in my head was a piercing agony, a white-hot knife twisting behind my eyes. And then a sound, not a whisper of sand, not the deep hum, but something new. A low, resonant thrum vibrating through the very floor beneath my bed. It grew louder. A low, resonant thrum vibrating through the very floor beneath my bed. It grew louder, shaking the foundations of the compound, rattling the very bones of the earth. The shimmering luminescence intensified, the walls glowing with an unearthly light, revealing intricate geometric patterns that seemed etched into the material, shifting and reforming with each pulsing thrum. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of my disoriented mind. This wasn't just inside my head anymore. This was real. This was physical. The thrum became deafening, an infrasound that bypassed my ears and vibrated directly through my skull, through my very cells. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. The air crackled with static electricity, making the fine hairs on my arms stand on end. I felt a profound sense of pressure, not just in my head, but pressing down on my entire body, as if the desert itself was collapsing in on me. My vision swam. The geometric patterns on the walls began to shift with impossible speed, coalescing into images. Vast canyons carved by unseen forces, towering mountains rising from ancient seas, molten rock churning deep beneath the crust. It was the Shaper's mindscape, but projected onto my physical reality, distorting my perception, eroding the barrier between the internal and external. Then, through the vibrating floor, something began to push upward. A faint, glowing fissure, no wider than a hair, appeared in the concrete beneath my bed. It expanded, accompanied by a faint scraping sound like grinding stone growing into a hairline crack. The crack spiderwebbed across the floor, glowing with that same eerie internal light, following the geometric patterns on the walls. I scrambled back, tumbling off the bed, hitting the Faraday-caged wall with a sickening thud. The thrumming intensified, reaching a crescendo that threatened to shatter my consciousness. The metallic taste in my mouth was overwhelming, burning my throat. I felt a primal scream building in my chest, but no sound escaped. Suddenly, the door to my room burst open. Lena, Kenji, and Vance rushed in, their faces masks of horror and alarm. Their own instruments were screaming. The air outside my room seemed to shimmer and vibrate as well, though not with the same intensity. "Alex!" Lena shouted, her voice barely audible over the infernal thrum. She tried to reach me, but the sheer force of the vibration seemed to push her back. Kenji, clutching a handheld sensor, stared at the floor, his eyes wide with disbelief. Field readings are off the charts. It's a localized seismic event, and the molecular structure of the concrete is changing. Vance, for once, looked utterly aghast, his usual scientific detachment shattered. He took in the glowing patterns, the vibrating walls, the expanding crack in the floor, and me, huddled against the wall, trembling uncontrollably. "It's not trying to communicate anymore," Vance rasped, his voice raw with a mixture of terror and awe. "It's trying to manifest, physically, through the nexus it has created in Alex." As he spoke, the crack in the floor widened further. The shimmering light pulsed faster. A fine, impossibly white sand, identical to the sample I carried, began to weep from the fissure, coalescing into tiny, perfect crystalline spirals. The Shaper's voice no longer just in my mind, but reverberating through the very air. Through the vibrating architecture of the room, roared a silent, ancient thought wave that crushed all other sound, all other sense. "The Earth AWAKNS, the conduit is complete, the voice will be heard." The overwhelming force of its presence, the searing pain in my head, the certainty of my impending dissolution became too much. My vision went white. I felt myself falling not just to the floor, but into an infinite, shifting landscape of sand and light. My last conscious thought was a desperate, silent plea for it to stop. I woke to the insistent beeping of medical machinery. The throbbing in my head was still there, but muted, a dull ache rather than a blinding agony. The metallic taste persisted, a constant phantom on my tongue. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights of the compound's small infirmary. Elena was leaning over me, her face pale and etched with exhaustion. Kenji stood beside her, his expression grim. Vance was nowhere to be seen. "Alex, can you hear me?" Lena's voice was soft, laced with a concern that seemed genuine. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw. I managed a weak nod. "You gave us quite a scare," Kenji said, a forced lightness in his tone. "Your neural activity flatlined for a few seconds there. We almost lost you." "Lost me?" The words echoed in my mind, bringing back the terrifying memory of the Shaper's presence, the vibrating room, the crumbling floor. What happened?" I croaked. Lena sighed, running a hand through her hair. "The Shaper attempted a direct, physical manifestation through your room. It was incredibly localized, almost surgical in its precision. It amplified your resonance to the point where it could affect the actual geological structure of the building, the floor in your room. It started to crystallize, to change its molecular composition, taking on the structure of the Shaper's sand." "But we stopped it," Kenji added quickly. We managed to flood the room with a focused, high-frequency electromagnetic pulse. It disrupted the energetic field, broke the connection, and the manifestation aborted. The damage to the room reversed mostly. It was unsettling. Unsettling, I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. It was trying to kill me, or worse, turn me into a part of it. Lena nodded, her gaze serious. We believe it was attempting to solidify its presence through you, to create a permanent anchor point in our dimension, to integrate your physical form and thereby your consciousness into its own. And Vance, I asked, a sudden cold dread washing over me. Where is Vance? Lena and Kenji exchanged a look. He's in his lab, Lena said carefully, analyzing the data. He's very focused right now. Focused? I pushed myself up, a wave of dizziness making the room sway. He was ecstatic, wasn't he? Another breakthrough, another data point for his precious research, even if it almost got me assimilated. Kenji stepped forward, putting a hand on my arm. Alex, he's shaken too, but this is everything he's worked for, to prove the Shapers exist, to understand their true nature. And my nature, I snapped, pulling my arm away. What about my nature? Am I just a sacrifice to his scientific ambition? Lena intervened, her voice firm. No, Alex, we won't let that happen. We've seen what this entity is capable of. We understand the risk. We've discussed it extensively with Vance. We all agree you cannot be exposed to that level of direct interaction again, not without some profound changes to our approach. What changes? I asked, my voice edged with suspicion. We need to find a way to shield you, truly shield you, from its influence while simultaneously trying to understand how to sever the connection entirely, Lena explained. The Faraday cage wasn't enough. The neural interface was catastrophic. We need a new strategy, one that prioritizes your autonomy, your survival. So what's the plan? Kenji pulled up a holographic display on a nearby tablet. Our primary theory is that the Shapers operate by manipulating subatomic particles, creating localized energetic fields that can influence matter and consciousness. The metallic taste you experience, the unique enzymatic reactions Lena found in your blood, these are not just symptoms. They are part of the Shaper's influence, subtly altering your own biology to make you more receptive, more aligned with its own vibrational frequency. You're becoming geomorphically attuned, Lena added, her voice quiet. That's why the traditional shielding failed. It's inside you, changing you from the ground up. My stomach clenched, so I'm being turned into a Shaper. Not entirely, Lena quickly clarified, but your body and mind are adapting to its presence. We need to reverse that process or at least stabilize it. We believe we can synthesize a unique biofrequency disruptor, something that can counteract the Shaper's internal resonance within your own system. A disruptor. Yes, Kenji continued, based on the inverse of the Shaper's detected energetic signature. It won't be a physical shield, it will be an internal one. A molecular counterfrequency that, in theory, should repel its direct influence from within your own biology. It sounded like science fiction, a desperate gamble. But what other choice did I have? How long will this take? Lena looked at Kenji. Weeks, months, perhaps. It's highly experimental. We'll need to work meticulously to synthesize the compound, test it, and then carefully administer it. and even then, there's no guarantee it will work. The Shaper is an ancient intelligence. It learns, it adapts. I slumped back onto the cot, the gravity of their words pressing down on me. Weeks, months, trapped in this remote facility, a human guinea pig, constantly fighting an invisible war for my own mind. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, a shared determination from Lena and Kenji that wasn't just about scientific discovery, but about my survival. What about Vance? I asked again. Does he agree with this? Lena hesitated. He understands the necessity of stabilizing you, but his primary focus remains on observing the Shaper's intent. He sees your internal changes as a unique opportunity to map its influence. So he still wants me as a bridge, I said, the bitter taste of truth in my mouth. He wants to understand, Kenji corrected, though his gaze softened with a hint of sympathy. And he believes that understanding is our only long-term defense against a being of this power. I didn't fully trust Vance, but I trusted Lena and Kenji enough to believe they would at least try to protect me. I had no one else. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Let's start. Let's make this disruptor. The next few weeks were a grueling test of endurance. My days became a relentless cycle of medical tests, biofeedback training, and the synthesis of the biofrequency disruptor. Lena and Kenji were a whirlwind of focused energy, their small lab humming with new machinery, new experiments. Lena was particularly meticulous with my blood and tissue samples, attempting to isolate the subtle geomorphic changes happening within my cells. She ran countless assays, attempting to identify the exact molecular structures the Shaper was inducing. Her theory was that the metallic taste, for instance, wasn't just a neurological sensation, but a result of microscopic, crystalline structures forming in my saliva glands and blood vessels. It's like a reverse osmosis process, she explained one evening, peering into a holographic display of my own cellular structure. The Shaper's energetic field isn't just influencing your mind, it's subtly altering your physical makeup to become more compatible with its own geomorphic existence. We need to create an inhibitor, a kind of molecular, jamming signal that blocks these changes at a cellular level. Kenji, meanwhile, was focused on the energetic signature. He built complex models, attempting to create an inverse wave pattern that would cancel out the Shaper's resonance within my body. He subjected me to brief, low-level electromagnetic pulses, carefully calibrated, trying to find a frequency that caused minimum discomfort but showed maximum potential to disrupt the Shaper's influence. The initial attempts were jarring, causing sharp spikes of pain in my head, but slowly, meticulously, they refined the process. My sleep was still plagued by the Shaper's presence, though the direct dreams of manifestation were less frequent. Instead, I'd experience fragmented visions, vast subterranean networks of light, the slow, deliberate grind of tectonic plates, or the almost melodic hum of primordial rock. The feeling of being watched was constant, an internal surveillance I couldn't escape. The metallic taste remained, a constant reminder of the alien presence within. Vance mostly remained in his own, cluttered section of the lab, poring over ancient texts and geological surveys. He rarely interacted with me directly, but I could feel his gaze intense and calculating whenever I passed by. He was still trying to find a pattern, a meaning in the Shaper's escalating interaction with me. He saw me as a living key, a Rosetta Stone to an ancient intelligence. One evening, a little over 3 weeks after the manifestation incident, Lena emerged from her synthesis lab with a small, hermetically sealed vial containing a milky, iridescent liquid. Her eyes, usually tired, sparkled with a cautious triumph. "We have it," she announced, holding up the vial. "The first viable iteration of the biofrequency disruptor, codenamed Null Point. It's a complex suspension of highly reactive nanoparticles designed to bind to and neutralize the specific geomorphic markers we've identified in your system. In theory, it should create a localized energetic barrier within your cells, making them less receptive to the Shaper's influence." My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. This was it, the moment of truth. "Are there any side effects?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. Lena's smile was fragile. "Potentially. Headaches, nausea, dizziness, perhaps some disorientation. Your body is undergoing a significant energetic recalibration. But we've cross-referenced it against your genetic profile. There should be no catastrophic reactions." Kenji joined us, his face serious. "We've also calibrated an external M-field generator. Once you ingest the null point, we'll use a low-level, focused pulse to help activate the nanoparticles, ensuring they disperse effectively throughout your system and begin their work. Think of it as a jump start." Vance emerged from his sanctuary, drawn by the news. He looked at the vial, then at me, his eyes unreadable. "A fascinating endeavor," he murmured, more to himself than to us. "To attempt to sever a nascent, symbiotic geomorphic integration. Unprecedented." He didn't offer words of encouragement, only detached observation. We moved to the infirmary. The air was thick with tension. I sat on the cot, my hands clasped tightly, watching Lena prepare the injection. Kenji calibrated the M-field generator, a complex array of coils that would surround my body. "Are you ready, Alex?" Lena asked, her voice soft. I took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." Lena injected the null point into my bloodstream. I felt a cold, tingling sensation spread from my arm, moving rapidly through my veins. It was strange, not painful, but deeply unsettling, like an invisible current flowing through my body. Then Kenji activated the M-field generator. A low hum filled the room, growing steadily louder. The tingling sensation intensified, becoming a pervasive itch, then a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to echo the Shaper's thrum, but in reverse. My head began to ache, a familiar pressure building, but this time it was different. It felt like two opposing forces were battling within my skull. The metallic taste in my mouth turned bitter, a coppery tang that made me gag. My vision blurred and the room spun. "Alex, how do you feel?" Lena's voice, distant and muffled, cut through the growing cacophony in my head. "Dizzy, nausea, headache," I gasped, clenching my teeth. Kenji watched his monitors intently. "Brainwave activity is stabilizing. The disruptor is taking effect. We're seeing a significant reduction in the Shaper's resonant frequency within her neural network." The pain in my head intensified to an almost unbearable degree, a blinding flash of white behind my eyes. I cried out, a strangled sound. It felt like my very consciousness was being torn apart. And then silence. Not just the absence of sound, but a profound, absolute stillness in my mind. The pressure in my head vanished. The metallic taste faded, leaving only a lingering bitterness. The dizziness subsided. I blinked, the room slowly coming back into focus. The M-field generator hummed gently. Lena and Kenji stared at their monitors, their faces a mixture of awe and relief. Vance stood silently in the corner, his eyes wide, fixed on me. For the first time in months, the Shaper's presence was gone. The constant hum, the feeling of being watched, the subtle invasion of my thoughts, all of it was absent. My mind felt quiet, empty almost, but in a good way. It was my own again. I took a deep, shuddering breath, tasting only the dry air of the infirmary, not the metallic tang. A tear traced a path down my cheek, a tear of pure, unadulterated relief. It worked, I whispered, my voice hoarse with emotion. It's gone. Lena rushed to my side, her face beaming. Your readings are completely normalized, no residual Shaper resonance. Your neural activity is stable, strong. We did it, Alex, you're free. Kenji let out a whoop of triumph, pumping his fist in the air. Even Vance allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. A wave of exhaustion, profound and absolute, washed over me. The fight was over. For now, I felt as if I could finally truly rest. I need to sleep, I murmured, feeling my eyelids grow heavy. Get some rest, Alex, Lena said, gently helping me lie back. You've earned it. We'll monitor you closely, but for now, the threat has been averted. As I drifted off to sleep, a single comforting thought echoed in my quiet mind. I am myself again. The first few days after the null point treatment were blissful. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The absence of the constant pressure in my head was a revelation, like a heavy weight had been lifted. The metallic taste was gone, replaced by the normal, slightly dusty taste of the desert air. My mind felt clear, sharp, unburdened. I could think my own thoughts without the subtle intrusion, the vast, alien whispers of the Shaper. I walked through the compound, feeling lighter, almost buoyant. The desert outside, once a source of terror, now seemed merely vast and indifferent. Lena and Kenji were elated, their joy almost contagious. They meticulously monitored my every vital sign, every brainwave, every cellular marker. All readings confirmed the null point was holding. The Shaper's geomorphic resonance was suppressed, its internal influence neutralized. I was, for all intents and purposes, disconnected. Vance, however, remained quietly contemplative. While he acknowledged the success of the treatment, his interest had shifted. He spent hours in his lab poring over the data collected during my active connection with the Shaper, particularly the profound insights from the symbiotic communication protocol. He was synthesizing a new understanding of the Shapers, one that went beyond mere observation. The null point is a triumph of bioenergetic engineering, Vance conceded one afternoon, during one of his rare forays into the main lab, where Lena, Kenji, and I were reviewing my latest clean scans. It has effectively neutralized the Shaper's localized influence on Alex's biology and neural pathways. However, he paused, his gaze fixed on me. It hasn't severed the underlying connection between a human mind and the Shaper consciousness. It has merely created a powerful internal barrier. What do you mean? I asked, a faint tremor of unease returning. I thought it was gone. The Shaper as an entity is still out there, Vance explained, gesturing vaguely towards the desert. It is still aware, and it is still most likely attempting to reach you. The null point simply prevents its direct, invasive influence. Think of it as a powerful, personalized firewall. It blocks the active malware, but the connection, the network, still exists, and the Shaper is an infinitely adaptable intelligence. Lena frowned, but her readings are entirely clean, Dr. Vance. There's no residual resonance, no detectable attempt at communication. Detectable by our instruments, Vance corrected, his voice tinged with a familiar weariness. But the Shapers communicate on frequencies we barely comprehend. Their true intent operates on a different scale. Alex's mind, having once been a direct conduit, now possesses a unique sensitivity. Even with the null point, she's still the most attuned human on the planet to their presence. His words, though delivered in his usual detached manner, sent a chill down my spine. The brief euphoria of my freedom began to recede, replaced by the familiar anxiety. I was still a beacon, still a target, even if I was now shielded. "So what now?" I asked. "Do I just live here indefinitely, protected by this disruptor?" Vance finally looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "That is the current recommendation for your safety. Outside these shielded walls, you would be vulnerable. The Shaper, sensing the blockage, might escalate its efforts, try to find a new way in, or even manifest directly, not just in your room, but in your proximity." The idea was terrifying, trapped permanently. "But we can't keep Alex here forever, Dr. Vance," Lena interjected, her voice firm. "She deserves a normal life, a life free from this threat." "Normalcy is a luxury few of us who understand the true nature of reality can afford, Dr. Petrova," Vance replied, his tone dismissive. "Alex has seen behind the veil. She is now part of something far greater than her individual life. Her knowledge, her unique connection, even if suppressed, is invaluable." "But it's her life," I insisted, finding my voice. "Not yours, not a data point. I want to go home. I want my life back." Vance merely sighed, turning back to his cluttered desk. "Perhaps, in time, we can devise a more permanent solution. But for now, Alex, this facility is your sanctuary and your purpose." His words left a bitter taste in my mouth, but I understood the stark reality. As long as the Shaper was out there, and as long as I was its perceived bridge, I was truly safe only within the confines of this strange, isolated compound. The null point had given me back my mind, but it had not given me back my freedom. Days turned into weeks. The initial relief gave way to a dull, grinding sense of captivity. I was free of the Shaper's direct influence, but I was still a prisoner. I helped Lena and Kenji with their experiments, cataloging rock samples, entering data, anything to keep my mind occupied. They at least treated me like a person, not just a specimen. They acknowledged my frustration, my longing for the outside world, for a life that was now seemingly out of reach. I took long walks around the perimeter of the compound, escorted by Kenji or Lena, always within sight of the security cameras. The desert, once a source of wonder then terror, now felt indifferent, almost mocking in its vastness. I tried to find beauty in it again, in the stark landscape, the resilient flora, the endless sky, but it was tainted by the knowledge of what lurked beneath, what ancient consciousness watched from the depths. One afternoon, almost 2 months after the null point treatment, something new happened. I was in my room, reading, enjoying the quiet normalcy, when I felt a peculiar sensation. Not the pressure, not the metallic taste, not the whisper of sand. It was a faint, almost subliminal pull. A gentle, insistent tug emanating from deep within the compound, seeming to resonate with something within me, despite the null point. It was subtle, like an echo of a forgotten dream or the ghost of a distant memory. It wasn't threatening, but it was undeniably there, a calling. I tried to ignore it, to dismiss it as an overactive imagination, a residual paranoia. But it persisted, growing stronger, more defined. It was coming from Vance's lab. I got up, heart pounding, with a mixture of apprehension and an undeniable curiosity. The null point was supposed to block its influence. Was this a new trick or something else entirely? I found Lena and Kenji in the main lab looking equally perplexed. Kenji was holding a small, portable M detector, its needle twitching erratically. Lena was peering into a complex array of geological sensors, her brow furrowed. "Are you feeling that?" I asked, my voice hushed. Lena looked up, her eyes wide. The low-frequency resonance, it's coming from Vance's section of the lab. It's not a shaper signature, not in the way we know it. It's different. "It's almost like an invitation," Kenji murmured, adjusting his detector. "A harmonic, a beacon." Just then, Vance emerged from his inner sanctum, his wild hair even more disheveled than usual, his eyes gleaming with an almost feverish intensity. He held a small, crystalline object in his hand, about the size of a pigeon's egg. It pulsed faintly with a soft, internal light and emanated the strange, inviting resonance we were all feeling. "Remarkable," Vance breathed, oblivious to our apprehension. "Absolutely remarkable. I've done it. I've found a way to bridge the gap." "Dr. Vance, what is that?" Lena demanded, her voice sharp with alarm. "And what is that frequency?" Vance turned to us, a manic smile spreading across his deeply lined face. "This, my dear Lena, is a focus shaper artifact, a geomorphic conduit. I've been synthesizing it using the null point's inverse frequency, combined with trace elements from Alex's original sand sample, and data from the shaper's own internal frequencies, which Alex so kindly provided during her integration." My blood ran cold. "You used my data, my cellular changes." "Of course," Vance replied, his smile unwavering. "You were the bridge, Alex. Your unique resonance allowed me to decode their internal language, their energetic blueprint. This artifact," he held up the glowing crystal, "is designed to emulate that original connection, but in a controlled, non-invasive manner. It allows for two-way communication without the risk of assimilation." "You built your own bridge," Kenji whispered, his face pale. "Precisely," Vance beamed. "A dedicated communication array, a direct channel to the shaper consciousness. I've been able to send simple thought forms, queries, and I've been receiving responses. Not in words, of course, but in complex streams of information, in abstract concepts, in images. It's like a direct download of geological knowledge." The strange, inviting pull intensified, emanating directly from the crystal. It was seductive, drawing me in, promising answers. It was everything I had sought in the desert, now held in Vance's hand, seemingly tamed. "This is incredibly dangerous, Dr. Vance," Lena exclaimed, stepping forward. "You don't know what you're dealing with. You could be putting the entire facility at risk, not just yourself." "Nonsense," Vance scoffed, waving her off. "I've taken every precaution. The artifact is calibrated to resonate only with my own neural signature. It establishes a connection, then disengages. A momentary, controlled interface. I have learned so much already. The true purpose of the Shapers, their ancient history, their role in planetary evolution." Suddenly, the crystal in Vance's hand pulsed brighter, its internal light flaring. The gentle pull intensified, becoming a sharp, insistent tug, no longer inviting but almost demanding. Vance's eyes widened, a flicker of alarm crossing his face. "What is it?" Kenji asked, his M detector beeping frantically. Vance gasped, clutching his head. It's demanding more. It wants a stronger connection. It's trying to leverage the artifact." The crystal pulsed violently, vibrating in Vance's hand. He staggered back, dropping the artifact. It hit the floor with a soft chime but didn't break. Instead, it began to expand, slowly at first, then rapidly, growing larger, taller, its crystalline structure twisting and reshaping itself, spiraling upward. The resonance in the lab became deafening, an unbearable, high-pitched whine that vibrated through the very air. The geometric patterns that had appeared on my room's walls during the manifestation incident now materialized on the lab walls, glowing with the same eerie light, pulsing in sync with the expanding crystal. "It's manifesting," Lena screamed, grabbing my arm. "It's using the artifact as a conduit." The crystal grew, shedding a fine, shimmering white sand that spread across the floor, forming intricate, impossible patterns. It was no longer a pigeon's egg. It was a towering, translucent spire of pure, organized energy, reaching towards the ceiling. And from within the spire, the familiar, terrifying form of the Shaper began to coalesce. Taller, grander, more immediate than I had ever seen it. Its blade-like limbs stretched within the crystalline structure, seeking, probing. The cluster of dark, multifaceted eyes at its apex spun, fixing on each of us, then settling on Vance, who was now crumpled on the floor, clutching his head, groaning in agony. The mental voice, no longer subtle, but a roaring torrent of thought, crushed into all our minds simultaneously. "You sought, you reached, you OPENID. The conduit is yours." But it was not directed at me. It was directed at Vance. "No," Vance cried out, his voice a ragged whisper. "I merely sought understanding, a controlled interface, not this assimilation." The Shaper's form solidified further within the towering crystal. One of its blade-like limbs, now impossibly intricate and sharp, began to extend from the spire towards Vance. It moved with an ancient, deliberate grace unstoppable. Lena, Kenji, and I watched, frozen in horror. The null point within me hummed, an internal firewall, protecting me from the direct psychic assault, but I could still feel the raw power of the entity, the sheer force of its ancient will. The Shaper's limb reached Vance. It didn't strike him, didn't impale him. Instead, it gently touched his forehead at the exact point where the pressure always began. Vance convulsed, a single guttural scream tearing from his throat, a sound of unimaginable agony and terror. His body arched, his eyes wide and bloodshot. Then slowly, terrifyingly, his screaming ceased. His body went limp. His eyes remained open, but the fierce intelligence, the weariness, the scientific hunger, all of it was gone, replaced by a vacant, glassy stare. A fine, impossibly white sand, identical to the sand I carried, began to weep from the corners of Vance's eyes, from his mouth, from his ears. It coated his face, his hair, his lab coat like a death shroud. His skin seemed to harden, to crystallize, taking on a pale, translucent sheen. He wasn't dead, not in the traditional sense. He was changed, assimilated, integrated, a geomorphic conduit, just as the Shaper had declared. The Shaper's form within the crystal pulsed, brighter, more vibrant. Its mental voice, now imbued with Vance's own memories, his knowledge, his understanding of the world, resonated in our minds. The seeker is found, the knowledge is shared, the conduit is strengthened. Lena gasped, clutching her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Kenji stood rigid, his face ashen, his M detector now emitting a flat, deadline tone. The towering crystal spire began to recede, slowly collapsing back into the small, pulsing artifact on the floor, leaving behind only a faint shimmer and a scattering of pure white sand. But Vance remained, still sitting on the floor, his body unnaturally rigid, his skin like polished quartz, his eyes staring blankly ahead, a silent, sand-weeping testament to his ambition. The Shaper was gone, its manifestation withdrawn, but it had left its mark, a devastating, chilling, permanent mark. A new fear, colder and deeper than any I had felt before, gripped me. The null point had shielded my mind, but it couldn't protect against the Shaper's raw power, its ability to find and leverage any connection, any opening. Vance had created a conduit, thinking he could control it, and had paid the ultimate price. He had become what he sought to understand. Lena stumbled forward, falling to her knees beside Vance. "Dr. Vance, alias," she whispered, her voice choked with grief and horror. She reached out, hesitantly touching his arm. His skin felt cold, hard like stone. Kenji slowly, reluctantly approached, his face a mask of disbelief. He's a Shaper now, a human one. The silence in the lab was profound, broken only by Lena's ragged sobs. The air, still heavy with ozone and the scent of fine sand, seemed to press down on us, a silent accusation. The Shaper, through Vance's folly, had achieved a new level of interaction. It had gained a physical presence. The silence that followed Vance's assimilation was a heavy shroud muffling the world. Lena knelt by Vance's petrified form, her sobs ragged and raw, echoing in the vast, echoing space of the lab. Kenji stood frozen, his face a ghostly white, his M detector fallen from his hand, silent. I felt a cold knot of dread twist in my stomach, more profound than any fear I had known before. The null point hummed faintly within me, a silent guardian, but it felt like a flimsy shield against the horror that had just unfolded. Vance, the brilliant, obsessive scientist, was gone, replaced by a grotesque statue, a testament to an ancient, indifferent power. "Elias," Lena whispered again, her voice breaking. She gently reached out and touched his hand. It was cold, hard, like polished granite, yet it still wept fine white sand. It looked as if he had been dipped in liquid stone and then crystallized, every pore weeping the Shaper's signature material. His eyes, fixed on some unseen point, reflected the lab lights with a chilling, vacant sheen. Kenji slowly moved, his movements stiff and mechanical, and picked up his detector. It remained silent, displaying a flat line. "No energy signature," he murmured, his voice hollow. "No life signs, not as we know them." He swallowed hard. "It's complete. He's a monument." My mind raced, trying to grasp the magnitude of what had happened. Vance had sought to control the Shaper, to create a controlled interface, but had instead become its puppet, its physical anchor. The Shaper hadn't just influenced him, it had repurposed him. This wasn't merely a mental assimilation, it was a physical one, a horrifying demonstration of its ability to reshape matter, to integrate human biology into its own geomorphic existence. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, afraid to disturb the fragile silence. He's still here, he's not moving." Lena finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen. We can't just leave him," she stammered, tears still flowing. He was a human being, my colleague." "He is a host now," Kenji corrected, his voice devoid of emotion, a stark scientific assessment. "A physical manifestation. The Shaper has achieved a new level of presence. It's no longer just a subterranean consciousness. It now has eyes and ears on the surface through him. The thought was chilling. Vance assimilated, standing witness to our every move, a silent spy. The implications were staggering. If the Shaper could do this to Vance, could it find a way around the null point in me? Could it find another route, another unsuspecting human to create more conduits? We need to contain him, I said, forcing myself to be pragmatic despite the terror. He can't stay here like this. What if it tries to activate him, to move him? Lena flinched at the idea. But how? He's practically made of stone. And what if touching him, what if it's contagious? She looked at her hand, which had briefly touched Vance's petrified arm. A wave of fear washed over her face. Kenji seemed to shake himself out of his stupor. Lena, Alex is right. We have to secure the lab. First, we need to understand what this means for us, for the compound, for the world. He looked around, his gaze scanning the shimmering residue left by the Shaper's manifestation. The intricate geometric patterns on the walls were already fading, but the fine, white sand still covered large areas of the floor. The null point, I said, looking at Kenji. Is it still working? Am I safe? Kenji pulled out a fresh, more sensitive neural scanner and directed it at me. He watched the readings intently, his brow furrowed. After a tense moment, he exhaled slowly. Your internal frequencies are still stable, Alex. The null point is holding. There's no detectable Shaper resonance within you. It's as if you have a perfect internal void where its influence should be. He paused, then added, but this manifestation was localized to Vance and the artifact he created. It bypassed your internal shielding by not attempting to connect to you directly. It found another way. My small comfort vanished. The Shaper was an adaptable enemy. My firewall was good, but it didn't mean it couldn't be circumvented by a different attack vector. Vance had given it a new key. We need to put the compound on full lockdown, Kenji continued, his voice regaining its professional urgency. And we need to contact command. This changes everything. They won't believe us. Lena, still kneeling, slowly rose. Her face was grim, but a steely resolve seemed to replace her raw grief. They have to, she said, her voice stronger now. We have evidence. Geological changes, fluctuations, a petrified human being. This isn't a theory anymore. This is a direct physical threat. We need to move Vance, I repeated, looking at the silent figure. And we need to clean this up. Any trace of that sand could be dangerous. Kenji nodded, agreed. We'll need specialized containment, and we need to analyze that sand. Immediately, it might hold clues to how it works, how it changed him. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Lena and Kenji, despite their shock and sorrow, moved with the precision of trained scientists in a crisis. They found a heavy-duty containment unit, typically used for volatile geological samples, and with immense difficulty managed to carefully place Vance's petrified form inside. It was heavy and possibly dense, like a solid block of marble. His eyes, still open and blank, seemed to follow our movements. It was horrifying. As we worked, the compound's automated security systems were put on high alert. Blast doors sealed, external sensors ramped up. The remote facility, always isolated, now felt like a sealed tomb. We were trapped inside with a horrifying secret and the terrifying knowledge that the ancient, indifferent entity beneath the desert had just escalated its game. Once Vance was secured, Kenji began a meticulous cleanup of the lab, carefully collecting every grain of the shimmering white sand in specialized vacuum filters and sterile containers. Lena, meanwhile, started running diagnostic checks on all systems, ensuring no residual shaper energy lingered. No other conduit had formed without our knowledge. I felt like an observer, my role reduced to that of a frightened witness. The null point was still silently working, keeping the shaper out of my head, but it couldn't quell the unease, the feeling of vulnerability that now permeated every corner of my existence. I was still the bridge, the initial contact point. Would the shaper now simply bypass me, finding other avenues, other vulnerable minds? Or would it try to reclaim its original target, now that it knew how to manifest physically? We finally collapsed hours later in the main common area, exhausted and emotionally drained. Lena had brewed strong coffee, the aroma cutting through the lingering scent of ozone and fine sand. The stark reality of our situation settled over us like the desert night. "We need to contact HQ," Lena said, her voice flat. "They need to know, but how do we explain this?" She gestured vaguely towards Vance's sealed containment unit, now visible through the reinforced observation window of his lab. Kenji ran a hand through his hair. "We present the data. The seismic events, the M spikes, the molecular changes in the lab, the physiological transformation of Dr. Vance. It's overwhelming evidence. But the implications are unprecedented. Planetary consciousness, geomorphic assimilation. It's going to sound like madness." "Because it is madness," I countered, a surge of anger cutting through my fear. "Vance created this, he unleashed it. His ambition cost him his life, and now we're stuck here with the consequences." Lena looked at me, a flicker of pain in her eyes. "Alex, I understand your anger, but Dr. Vance truly believed he was helping us understand, helping us protect humanity. He went too far. He miscalculated its capabilities, its adaptability." "He saw me as a data point, Lena," I said, my voice rising. "He saw you as data points. He saw the planet as a data point. He didn't care about the risk, only the discovery." The words were bitter, fueled by a resentment that had festered for weeks. Kenji cleared his throat. "Regardless of Vance's motivations, we are in a new and highly precarious situation. The Shaper now has a physical presence. It has demonstrated an ability to assimilate a human consciousness and body. This changes our entire threat assessment. This isn't about observation anymore, it's about survival." "What is its purpose?" Lena mused, staring into her coffee cup. "Why would it do this to Vance? To gain understanding, as it claimed, or to use him as a tool for some larger agenda?" "It said the conduit is strengthened," I recalled, the Shaper's chilling thought voice echoing in my memory. "It gained his knowledge, his understanding of our world, and it got a physical anchor. It can move now, perhaps, influence on a deeper level." Kenji's eyes widened. "If it can move, if it can project its consciousness through Vance's physical form, it could leave the compound. It could walk out into the desert, or worse, into a populated area." The thought was terrifying. A petrified Vance walking like a zombie, animated by an ancient alien intelligence, spreading its influence, its terrifying sand, its geomorphic changes. The world wouldn't stand a chance. "No," Lena said, shaking her head forcefully. "We contained him. We secured the lab. The containment unit is reinforced, and the compound is designed to withstand seismic activity. We have to believe it's safe here, for now." "For now," I repeated, the phrase offering little comfort. The compound felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage, a place where we were trapped with an unknown, unknowable monster. The communication with HQ was, as expected, difficult. We relayed the data, the eyewitness accounts, the photographic evidence of Vance's assimilation. There was disbelief, outrage, and then a slow, dawning horror as they absorbed the implications. General Maxwell, our direct superior, was apoplectic. "You mean to tell me," Maxwell's voice boomed through the secure comms line, his face grim and distorted on the holographic display, "that Dr. Elias Vance, the leading xenogeologist on this project, has been turned into a rock by a sentient geological entity that he provoked?" "General, with all due respect, his transformation is far more complex than that," Lena explained calmly, despite the fury in Maxwell's voice. "He has been integrated. His physical form has been altered to become a permanent conduit, a physical anchor for the Shaper consciousness. We believe the Shaper now has access to his memories, his knowledge, and potentially the ability to control his physical body." "And Alex," Maxwell snapped, his gaze shifting to me, "is she still a target? Is she going to turn into a rock next?" "No, General," Kenji interjected. "The null point is holding. Her internal shielding is working perfectly. The Shaper bypassed her by leveraging the artifact Dr. Vance created. It found a new entry point, specifically designed to resonate with human consciousness, but it did not target Alex directly." "So you're telling me that we have an assimilated human asset, a potential weapon for an alien intelligence secured in your lab, and the original target, Alex, is still vulnerable if the Shaper finds another way around your null point?" Maxwell rubbed his temples, his frustration evident. "And you expect us to believe this? This sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, not a geological survey." "General, we have photographic evidence of the molecular changes in the concrete, the unique energetic signature, the transformation of Dr. Vance. We can't deny what we've witnessed," Lena insisted. Maxwell sighed, a long, weary sound. All right, I'm sending a specialized containment team and a full tactical assessment unit. They should arrive within 48 hours. Until then, you are on full lockdown. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to interact with Vance's form. Do not touch it. Do not approach it. Do not do anything that might activate it. And Alex, you are to remain within the most shielded sections of the compound at all times. This is a direct order. Is that clear? Yes, General, we replied in unison. The call ended, leaving us once again in a heavy silence. The cavalry was coming, but it brought with it a new layer of scrutiny, suspicion, and potential interference. And 48 hours felt like an eternity when an ancient, alien entity now had a physical toehold within our facility. I don't like this, Kenji muttered, pacing the room. A tactical assessment unit, they're not going to try to understand, they're going to try to contain. And if they can't contain, they'll try to destroy. And that includes Vance and potentially us if they deem the threat too high. Lena looked worried. They'll see Vance as a threat, not a tragedy. And they'll likely see Alex as a risk factor, not a survivor. My heart sank. My freedom with the null point was fleeting. Now I was a risk, a liability, a potential conduit that still needed to be managed, perhaps even eliminated, by a military command that prioritized containment over understanding. We spent the next 2 days in a state of high alert. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every creak of the old compound building amplified our anxiety. We meticulously monitored Vance's containment unit, but he remained utterly still, a silent, petrified sentinel. The lab, once a place of scientific discovery, was now a morbid shrine. I tried to keep busy, helping Lena and Kenji with their endless data analysis, but my mind kept drifting back to Vance, to the implications of his fate. The Shaper had shown its true face. It was not just an ancient consciousness, it was a shapeshifter, an integrator, an entity that could rewrite biological reality. And it was still out there, under the desert, watching, learning, adapting. On the morning of the third day, a massive transport plane roared over the compound, descending through the shimmering desert air. It was followed by 2 attack helicopters, their rotors thudding heavily in the silence. The air was thick with dust and the throb of powerful engines. The security team that disembarked was heavily armed, clad in desert camouflage, and moved with ruthless efficiency. They were led by a stern-faced woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Colonel Anya Sharma. Dr. Petrova, Dr. Tanaka, Alex. She greeted us, her voice clipped and professional, as soon as she stepped into the compound's main entrance. Her gaze swept over us, lingering on me for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable in her dark eyes. I am Colonel Sharma. General Maxwell has briefed me on the situation. My team will be taking over all security and containment protocols. Her presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. We were no longer in charge. We were now under military control, our scientific endeavor superseded by a tactical operation. Colonel, we have detailed reports and data logs we'd like to share with you, Lena began, trying to assert some scientific authority. Sharma held up a hand. All data will be collected and reviewed by my team's specialists. For now, my priority is assessment and containment. Where is Dr. Vance? Kenji led her to Vance's lab, stopping at the reinforced observation window. Sharma's eyes narrowed as she observed the petrified figure in the containment unit. Her face remained impassive, but a flicker of something, recognition, alarm, crossed her features. Unbelievable, she muttered, more to herself than to us. She spent several long minutes simply staring at Vance, her head tilted, as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. Then she turned to us. Alex, she said, her voice sharp. General Maxwell reports that you were the initial point of contact. The conduit. You possess some unique physiological and neurological markers that made you susceptible, and you are currently being protected by this null point biofrequency disruptor. Is that correct? Yes, Colonel, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The null point has blocked the Shaper's direct influence. I haven't felt its presence since the treatment. Good, Sharma said, though her expression remained grim, because you are now our primary asset and our primary risk. Until we fully understand how to permanently sever this connection, you will remain under my direct supervision. You will not leave this compound. You will not interact with any external communications, and you will follow all orders without question. But Colonel, Lena interjected, Alex has been through a traumatic experience. She needs rest and eventually a chance to resume a normal life. Sharma gave Lena a cold look. Normalcy is a luxury we can no longer afford, Doctor, not with a planetary consciousness that can turn humans into rock statues. Alex is the key to understanding this threat. And if she remains a potential conduit, she is a threat herself. My priority is the security of this planet, not the comfort of one individual. My heart sank even further. My worst fears were confirmed. I wasn't just a prisoner, I was now a strategic asset, a living weapon that could potentially be turned against them. My freedom was entirely dependent on their ability to control the Shaper or me. Over the next few days, Sharma's team systematically took over the compound. Additional shielding was installed around Vance's containment unit, and his lab was sealed off as a level 5 biohazard zone. New sensors were deployed both internally and externally, creating a dense web of monitoring devices. The atmosphere was one of grim determination, paranoia, and a terrifyingly efficient military discipline. Sharma's specialists, a team of scientists and engineers, began poring over our data. They questioned us endlessly, trying to piece together the Shaper's motives, its capabilities, and the exact mechanism of its influence. They were intelligent, but their approach was clinical, devoid of the human empathy Lena and Kenji had offered. One evening, Sharma called us into a secure briefing room where a large holographic display projected a detailed topographical map of the desert, overlaid with various energy readings and geological anomalies. Our preliminary analysis of your data, combined with our own satellite scans, confirms the presence of a vast subterranean network of geomorphic anomalies, Sharma stated, her finger tracing a glowing pattern beneath the desert surface. These anomalies correlate precisely with Dr. Vance's Shaper theory. Your claims, however outlandish, appear to be accurate. We are indeed dealing with a sentient geological entity or collective, operating on a planetary scale. She paused, her gaze sweeping over us. The assimilation of Dr. Vance is particularly troubling. Our forensic specialists have confirmed the complete molecular recomposition of his cellular structure. He is, to all intents and purposes, a living rock, and the analysis of the sand residue indicates a highly organized, highly intelligent manipulation of matter at a subatomic level. So you believe us, Lena said, a hint of relief in her voice. We believe the evidence, Sharma corrected. And the evidence points to an existential threat. This entity perceives humanity as a disturbance, a fleeting plague. It intends to reshape us, to influence our perception. Dr. Vance's assimilation was not an isolated incident. It was a calculated escalation. The Shaper is now testing its capabilities, finding new ways to interact with our dimension. And what is the new strategy? Kenji asked, his voice tight. Sharma turned to the map. General Maxwell has authorized a new directive, Operation Earthsong. Our primary objective is to understand the Shaper's communication protocols, to decipher its intent, and to find a way to neutralize its threat. Our secondary objective is to study and, if possible, replicate its geomorphic capabilities for defensive purposes. My blood ran cold. Replicate its capabilities, you want to weaponize the Shaper. Sharma turned a hard gaze on me. We want to survive, Alex. If this entity can transform matter, if it can assimilate human consciousness, then we need to understand how. For too long, we've treated this as a scientific curiosity. It is now a matter of national and indeed global security. If the Shaper decides to manifest on a wider scale to start converting cities, we need a countermeasure. We need to understand its language, its weaknesses, its vulnerabilities. But you can't fight an entire planet's consciousness, Lena exclaimed. It operates on a geological timescale. Our weapons, our technology are insignificant compared to its power. We don't know that, Sharma countered. We have Alex. She has demonstrated a unique attunement, a resonance. Even with the null point, she is still the primary link, and we have Dr. Vance, a living, albeit petrified, example of its physical manifestation. We will learn. And how do you propose to learn? I asked, a sense of foreboding settling over me. I'm shielded. Vance is assimilated. You can't just ask him questions. Sharma's lips curved into a thin, humorless smile. That's where our new approach comes in. We believe the Shaper communicates through subtle energetic frequencies, through a kind of thought wave that interacts directly with neural pathways. Your null point is effective at blocking this incoming influence, Alex, but it doesn't stop you from emitting your own unique frequency. My unique frequency, I repeated, confused. Yes, Sharma confirmed. Your innate resonance with the Shaper, the very thing that made you a bridge. We believe that even with the null point, that underlying resonance still exists. It's dormant, suppressed, but it's there, and we intend to use it. A chill ran down my spine. How? We've developed a new iteration of neural interface technology, Sharma explained, gesturing to a schematic that appeared on the holographic display. It was far more advanced than Kenji's original design, bristling with complex energy converters and finely tuned sensors. Codenamed Project Oracle, it's designed not to receive the Shaper's influence, but to amplify your own outgoing resonance. To project your thoughts, your queries, your consciousness directly into the Shaper's network, but under our complete control. You want me to talk to it again? I whispered, my voice thick with dread. The memory of the symbiotic communication protocol, the overwhelming information, the terror of assimilation flooded back. Not directly, Sharma corrected. Not in the way you did before. This interface is designed with multiple layers of redundant safeguards. It will channel your mental energy, your curiosity, your intent into a focused beam. Think of it as a directed thought pulse. We will send simple queries, questions we want answered, and the Oracle will amplify them, ensuring they reach the Shaper network without compromising your internal shield. And any response will be filtered and analyzed by the Oracle, translated into a comprehensible data stream rather than a direct mental download. Kenji looked skeptical. Colonel, that's incredibly risky. We barely understand the Shaper's communication. An amplified thought pulse could be perceived as an aggressive act. Or worse, it could create a new vulnerability for Alex despite the null point. We've accounted for those risks, Dr. Tanaka, Sharma stated, her tone dismissive. The Oracle is designed to be highly directional, highly controlled. It won't be a full, open channel. It will be more like dropping a coded message into a vast ocean and then waiting for an echo. And Alex's unique resonance is the only way we can ensure that message is even heard. Lena stepped forward, her face etched with concern. But what about Alex's autonomy, her consent? She has already suffered immensely. You're asking her to put herself back on the front lines, even with safeguards. Sharma turned to me, her expression unwavering. Alex, you are critical to Operation Earthsong. Your connection is the only one we have. We need you to volunteer. The alternative is unthinkable. If we fail to understand the Shaper, if it chooses to escalate its manifestations, then the consequences for humanity are catastrophic. You have seen what it can do. You have felt its power. Do you truly believe we can afford to ignore it? I looked at the schematic of Project Oracle, then at Lena and Kenji, their faces a mixture of fear and reluctant acceptance. Then I looked at the observation window, at Vance's petrified form, a silent monument to ambition and folly. The Shaper was out there. It was ancient, powerful, and now it had a physical presence. Ignoring it was no longer an option. Hiding was no longer an option. But to step back into the fray, even with new safeguards, was terrifying. The memory of the crushing inevitability, the vision of cities crumbling into dust, still haunted my dreams. The Shaper saw us as temporary, as a disturbance. How could we fight that? Yet a part of me, that same curiosity that had driven me into the desert, that had woken the resonance, still burned. The desire to understand, to know, to truly comprehend this ancient intelligence, and perhaps a nascent sense of responsibility. I was the one who had opened the channel. Perhaps I was also the one who had to close it, or at least help humanity navigate this terrifying new reality. What will you ask it? I finally managed, my voice hoarse. Sharma's eyes gleamed with a cold determination. Everything, its true nature, its vulnerabilities, its long-term goals, and how we can coexist, or if coexistence is even possible. She paused. And we want to know how to reverse Dr. Vance's assimilation, how to bring him back. The last part about Vance caught me off guard. There was a faint flicker of something almost human in Sharma's eyes as she said it, a hint that even she was affected by the tragedy of his fate. I took a deep breath. My quiet life, my old self, was gone forever. There was no going back. I was part of this now, whether I liked it or not. And if I was going to be a bridge, then I would choose to be a bridge that fought for humanity, not one that led to its assimilation. All right, I said, my voice firmer now. I'll do it, but on one condition. Sharma raised an eyebrow. And what is that, Alex? Lena and Kenji, I said, looking at my colleagues. They are part of my team, I trust them, and their scientific expertise is invaluable. No more specialists overriding their judgment. We work together. Sharma considered this for a long moment, her gaze flicking between us. Finally, she gave a curt nod. Agreed, their skills are noted, but I retain final command authority. We understand each other. We understand, Lena and Kenji confirmed, a shared sense of grim resolve on their faces. And so Operation Earthsong began. The construction of Project Oracle took several intense weeks. The new neural interface was a marvel of advanced technology, far more complex and robust than anything Kenji had previously designed. It was housed in a newly reinforced, heavily shielded chamber, even more secure than my old room. The entire setup was designed to funnel and amplify my mental energy, creating a directed pulse of thought, while simultaneously filtering out any potential incoming shaper influence. Lena and Kenji worked tirelessly alongside Sharma's team of engineers, often clashing over methodology, but ultimately driven by the common goal. Lena focused on the biological safeguards, meticulously designing systems to monitor my every physiological response, to ensure the null point remained effective, and to instantly sever the connection if any sign of shaper resonance was detected within me. Kenji, meanwhile, obsessed over the energetic calibration, trying to find the precise frequency to penetrate the shaper's vast, subterranean network without provoking an overwhelming response. I spent my days undergoing intense training, biofeedback exercises designed to hone my mental focus, to separate my conscious intent from the background noise of my own mind. It was like learning to scream with my thoughts, to project them with laser-like precision. The experience was exhausting, leaving me drained and often with a dull ache behind my eyes. But I was determined. I would not be a passive bridge. I would be an active voice. Sharma, for her part, led the overall operation with unwavering resolve. She was a demanding but fair leader, always focused on the mission. She held daily briefings, poring over every shred of data, every anomaly, trying to construct a coherent picture of the shaper's true nature. She even brought in specialists in linguistics and ancient symbology, hoping to find any parallels between geological formations and the shaper's abstract communication. One breakthrough came when Kenji discovered a subtle, resonant frequency embedded within the white sand residue from Vance's assimilation. It wasn't just inert matter, it carried a faint, rhythmic pulse, a kind of geological heartbeat. He theorized that this was the Shaper's most fundamental signature, the language of its existence. Project Oracle was then recalibrated to use this frequency as its carrier wave, to ensure our thought pulses were delivered in a form the Shaper would recognize but not perceive as inherently hostile. Think of it as learning their accent, Kenji explained to me one evening, his eyes gleaming with a mix of exhaustion and excitement. We're not speaking their language, not yet, but we're ensuring our message is delivered in a way they might be able to process. Finally, the day of the first Project Oracle connection arrived. The tension in the compound was palpable. Sharma had assembled a full team in the main control room. Lena, Kenji, myself, her lead scientists, and several armed security personnel, a stark reminder of the mission's gravity. I walked into the Oracle chamber, a cylindrical room of polished metal and complex circuitry, feeling a familiar blend of dread and fierce determination. The null point hummed faintly within me, a reassuring presence. This time I wasn't going in blind. I was prepared. I sat in the specialized chair, the new neural interface helmet settling over my head. It was sleeker, less invasive than the previous one, but the multitude of electrodes still felt alien against my scalp. Lena ran the final bioscans, Kenji meticulously checked the Oracle's energy readouts, and Sharma stood by the main console, her face a mask of concentrated focus. "Remember your training, Alex." Sharma's voice was calm, steady, cutting through the hum of machinery. "Maintain your focus. Your intent is paramount. We will send specific questions one at a time. Project them clearly. The Oracle will handle the rest. At any sign of compromise, Lena will initiate emergency disconnect. Is that understood?" "Understood," I replied, my voice steady. The lights dimmed. The Oracle chamber filled with a low, resonant hum, deeper and more complex than anything I'd felt before. It vibrated through the floor, through the chair, through my very bones, a powerful yet somehow comforting resonance. This was Kenji's carrier wave, the Shaper's heartbeat, now encompassing me. I closed my eyes, focusing on my mental center, picturing myself as a clear, unblemished beacon. My mind was my own, protected by the null point. I would send the message, but I would not be consumed by the reply. "First question, Alex." Sharma's voice came through my earpiece, calm and clear. "Project, what is your purpose? Why do you perceive humanity as a disturbance?" I focused, gathering my thoughts, shaping them into a clear, concise question. I visualized it as a pure beam of light radiating from my mind, carried by the deep, resonant frequency of the Oracle. I pushed it outward, towards the unseen, vast consciousness beneath the earth. I waited. The hum in the chamber intensified slightly. The screens in the control room flickered, displaying complex wave patterns and energy fluctuations. But there was no overwhelming influx of information, no crushing mental presence, no metallic taste, no pressure in my head. The null point was holding. After a moment of silence, a new pattern began to emerge on the Oracle's main display. It wasn't words, not even images in the human sense. It was a complex, multi-layered data stream, flowing with intricate geometries and evolving energetic signatures. It was the Shaper's response, translated and filtered by the Oracle. "We're getting a response," Kenji exclaimed, his voice filled with awe. "The Oracle is processing it now. It's massive, a torrent of information but compartmentalized." Sharma leaned forward, her eyes glued to the display. Translate primary concepts, prioritize intent. The Oracle's AI system began to work, rapidly decoding the intricate data stream, attempting to render it into human comprehensible language and concepts. Slowly, keywords began to appear on the screen: balance, harmony, correction, geological imperative, transient contamination. It says its purpose is to maintain planetary balance, Lena read aloud, her voice hushed. And it perceives humanity as a transient contamination that disrupts the geological imperative. It's like an immune system for the Earth. It sees us as a disease, I whispered, the concept chilling me to the bone. Next question, Alex, Sharma commanded her. Next question, Alex, Sharma commanded, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. Ask, why are you doing this? What is your ultimate goal for humanity? I took a steadying breath, the hum of the oracle thrumming deep within me. I focused again, picturing the question as a distinct, luminous thought, amplified and sent outward. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce resolve. I wanted answers. We all did. Again, the silence stretched, broken only by the rhythmic pulse of the oracle's carrier wave. Then, the data stream began to flow anew, intricate and vast, across the control room's main display. Kenji's fingers flew across his console, the oracle's AI working furiously to translate. Keywords appeared: correction, reintegration, balance restored, form shift, non-essential elements. It says its goal is correction and reintegration, Lena read, her voice strained, to restore balance, and it refers to humanity as non-essential elements slated for a form shift. A chill, colder than the desert night, seeped into my bones. Form shift, like Vance, it wants to turn us all into rock. That appears to be the implication, Alex, Sharma said, her voice grim. She exchanged a quick, worried glance with her lead scientist. It sees us as something to be reabsorbed into the planetary ecosystem, albeit in a fundamentally altered state. It's not trying to kill us, not in the traditional sense, Kenji added, his eyes wide. It's trying to change us, to make us part of itself, to stop our contamination by making us geological. The concept was horrifying, not annihilation but absorption. A complete erasure of human identity, of consciousness, replaced by a crystalline existence, a silent component of the Shaper's vast, ancient network. Vance's fate was not an isolated incident, it was a blueprint. Ask it about Vance, I urged, the words coming out in a rush. Ask, can Dr. Vance be reversed? Can he be returned to his human form? Sharma nodded and I focused, pushing the question through the oracle. The response came, this time with a swift, almost dismissive clarity. Integration is absolute. Form shift is irreversible. The conduit serves. Elena gasped, clutching her hand to her mouth. Kenji slumped slightly, a look of profound defeat on his face. Vance was truly gone. There was no going back for him. The Shaper offered no mercy, no second chances. It simply was. It's absolute, Sharma repeated, her voice flat. The integration is permanent. She paused, then her eyes hardened. All right, Alex, one more question for this session. Ask, what are your weaknesses? What can harm you? This was the strategic question, the one that truly mattered to Sharma. I projected it with all the force I could muster, focusing on the core desire for self-preservation, for a way to fight back. The Shaper's response was different this time. It wasn't a torrent of complex data, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the Oracle's carrier wave. The hum deepened, grew richer, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a familiar resonance, not from the Shaper to me, but from the Oracle within me. It was like a faint echo, a brief subliminal flicker of the vast consciousness that had once inhabited my mind. The null point, however, remained a solid, impenetrable barrier. Then the Oracle displayed its interpretation: disruption, disharmony, incoherent resonance, the unaligned, the fragmented. Disruption, Lena mused, her brow furrowed. Disharmony, what does that even mean? It sounds like it's describing anything that can't be integrated, Kenji hypothesized, his voice thoughtful. Anything that resists its fundamental desire for balance and harmony. The Shaper seeks order. Perhaps chaos is its enemy. Sharma paced the control room, her mind clearly racing. The unaligned, the fragmented, does that imply a resistance to its collective consciousness? An individual consciousness that refuses to be absorbed? She looked at me, a new intensity in her eyes. Alex, your null point, it's a form of internal fragmentation, isn't it? A disruption to its attempts at connection. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it made sense. My internal firewall, by creating a void where the Shaper's influence should be, was an act of disruption, of disharmony from its perspective. It prevented me from becoming aligned. Yes, I confirmed, a flicker of understanding blooming within me. It can't get in, it can't integrate me. So, the null point isn't just a shield, it's a weapon, Sharma concluded, a predatory glint in her eye. A form of active resistance to its fundamental nature. If we could replicate this effect on a larger scale, if we could create an environment of incoherent resonance. The implications were staggering. If my personal null point could be scaled up, could it create a localized zone of anti-Shaper influence? Could it prevent assimilation or even disrupt its manifestations? End session, Sharma commanded, her voice ringing with newfound purpose. Alex, disconnect. Lena, Kenji, review all data. I want an immediate analysis of the Shaper's definition of disharmony and fragmentation. Alex, meet me in the briefing room in 10 minutes. The Oracle powered down, the hum fading, and the neural interface helmet was gently lifted from my head. I felt drained, but also invigorated. We had answers, chilling as they were, and a potential path forward. In the briefing room, Sharma wasted no time. Alex, your null point is the key. The Shaper itself confirmed it. It's an anomaly, a disruption to its harmony. We need to understand its exact mechanism and see if it can be scaled up. It's a unique bioenergetic frequency, kernel, Lena explained, joining us with Kenji. Tailored to Alex's specific neural pathways and cellular resonance. Replicating it for others would require individual calibration, which is incredibly complex, and scaling it to a geological level to disrupt the Shaper itself is our new primary objective, Sharma finished, her voice firm. If we can create a localized field of null point energy, we might be able to prevent Shaper manifestation, or even sever its connection to its conduits. Dr. Tanaka, your expertise in energy fields and resonance frequencies will be critical. Dr. Petrova, you will lead the bioenergetic replication efforts. Alex, you will continue to be our oracle. We need more data, more understanding of its weaknesses. Over the next few weeks, the compound became a whirlwind of intense research and development. Sharma pushed her teams relentlessly, driven by the urgency of the threat. Lena and Kenji, now fully integrated into Operation Earthsong's leadership, led their respective teams with renewed vigor. I continued my oracle sessions, pushing deeper into the Shaper's vast consciousness, guided by Sharma's precise questions. We asked about its ancient history, its origins, its interactions with previous life forms on Earth. The Shaper's responses painted a cosmic picture, a narrative of immense geological cycles. It described itself as an ancient, evolving consciousness, an emergent property of the Earth's core, its tectonic plates, its very mineral composition. It had witnessed countless epochs, the rise and fall of species, the slow, deliberate dance of planetary evolution. Humanity, in its perspective, was a fleeting, destructive blip, a biological anomaly creating energetic pollution and disrupting the Earth's natural, harmonic rhythms. It saw its actions not as malevolent, but as a necessary correction, a way to restore the planet to its intended geomorphic balance. We learned that the Shaper wasn't a single, unified entity in the human sense, but a vast, distributed network of consciousness, with nodes of heightened awareness located at specific geological nexus points. The desert beneath us was one such nexus. Its body was the Earth itself. The question of its vulnerability remained elusive. Each time we pressed for specific weaknesses, the oracle's filtered response became more abstract, more difficult to translate. It spoke of unpredictable chaos, unpatterned noise, energetic discord. It seemed to imply that anything outside its ordered, harmonic existence was a threat, but it offered no concrete methods for exploiting that. Meanwhile, Lena's team made a breakthrough in understanding the null point's core mechanics. It wasn't just a frequency disruptor, it actively created a localized quantum vacuum, a small pocket of antiresonance that prevented the Shaper's energy from cohering within my neural pathways. It was like a black hole for Shaper influence, tiny but absolute. Kenji's team, building on this, began experimenting with powerful directional energy emitters, attempting to project a similar, scaled-up antiresonance field. They faced immense challenges. The energy requirements were astronomical, and the delicate balance of frequencies was difficult to maintain. The field, when generated, was unstable, often dissipating within seconds. One afternoon, during a particularly intense oracle session, I felt a shift. We were asking about the Shaper's response to seismic activity, trying to understand if physical disruption could be a weakness. The oracle was processing a complex data stream, showing abstract images of geological upheaval, of magma flows and shifting crusts. Suddenly, a new, alarming pattern